Chapter 73, Inspiration in an Emergency. Mo, finding inspiration in an emergency, gave a horrific wail and then collapsed on the ground. Outside the Dan room, the disciple heard Mo's wail and asked panicked, Xianxia. Xianxia. Are you alright? There wasn't a response. Su Qing, who had been paying attention to the situation, hurriedly ran over and yelled across the door, Xianxia. What is it? Are you alright? There still wasn't a response from inside. Su Qing instantly became extremely worried and, disregarding that she might be scolded, opened the Dan room and saw Mo unconscious on the ground. Su Qing was shocked but didn't mess up. She crisply yelled at the disciple who had come to ask for Mo, go tell the sect leader. That disciple, frightened out of his wits, ran outside. In Wukong Hall, Pei Yuan ran and the others were attending to Yunxia Xianxi's group. This group coming to visit Wukong Sword Sect really was giving face to Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Naturally, Pei Yuan Ran and the others were courteous and warm. Both guest and host were extremely amiable. So many Jindan Xiuzhe, not just in Dongfu, but even in Sky Moon Jia, it was an extremely grand group of people. For the disciples that were serving at the side, other than staring with wide eyes and a gaping mouth, they felt extremely honored. Before Wei Sheng had Juji, Wukong Sword Sect hadn't been known in Dongfu. Now, even a group of the strong masters of Bright Wave Jia had lowered themselves to visit the sect. No other sect had received such honor in Dongfu. Maybe, in all of Kunlun Jing, Bright Wave Jia wasn't anything. But it governed 31 small Jia, including Sky Moon Jia. Even the strong masters from Bright Wave Jia were so respectful to Xian Yen Shishu. Only now did the disciples know the cold and taciturn Xian Yen Shishu was so strong. In their eyes, their sect became even more mysterious. Conversation flowed across Wukong Sword Sect. After confirming Xian Yan's identity, Yunxia Xianxia and the others deliberately started to attempt to win him over. They were very disappointed that Wei Sheng was unable to come out of the sword cave. Not being able to meet Wei Sheng, the one rumored to have created an apparition on Juji, it still wasn't a waste of time if they could meet this Mo who had so many talents. For some people, like old He, their interest in Mo far surpassed their interest in Wei Sheng. At this time, the disciple that had gone to call Mo scrambled in, oh no, Pei Yuan Ran's brows furrowed in dissatisfaction. He asked in a deep voice, what are you panicked about? Seeing the displeasure of the sect leader, the disciple was even more nervous and stammered, sect leader. Mo Xixiang fainted. Hearing this, Shi Feng Rong suddenly stood up. What happened? Say it slowly. Pei Yuan Ran shouted. His voice carried, clear sound incantation. Everyone felt their minds become clear and couldn't help but mentally compliment Pei Yuan Ran on his cultivation. Suffering the shout, the mind of the outer sect disciple suddenly cleared up. His voice became clear and words simple, Mo Xixiang had been dan-making for a few days without rest and his mind was fragile. When this disciple was reporting to Xixiang, this disciple suddenly heard a shout from the Dan room. There wasn't a response when this disciple asked the next few times. Su Qin Shiji opened the door and found Xixiang unconscious on the ground. When this disciple saw him, Xixiang's complexion was terribly unwell. It must have been many days since he came out of the Dan room. Hearing this, Shi Feng Rong stood, everyone, please excuse me. Finishing, she started to hurry towards Fragrant Ginger Yard. At this time, Pei Yuan Ran raised his hands in an apology, this one's shimmy is worried about her disciple and lost her composure. Please, excuse her. Sect leader Pei is too serious. If our sect had such geniuses, as elders, we would be the same. Old He said. The others nodded in agreement. Yes, your sect really has good fortune. In my sect, the disciples are average and have no great accomplishment. Every time I think of it, I cannot sit still in fears that the fires of the sect will extinguish with my generation. Then it would truly be an unpardonable crime. Yuan Li couldn't help but add. Everyone felt great empathy with Yuan Li's words. Pei Yuan Ran had a joyful expression. In the beginning, he and the others had felt the same as Yuan Li, sect leader Pei. He picked his words and said, to be able to make golden crow pills just as he has started to learn dan making, your sect's disciple has great talent in dan making. This old man has rarely seen anything like it in these many years. He then sighed, these many years, this old man has seen many outstanding talents. Growing older, this one has found that all things are the same. With talent, one always tried to extract things from it, and this causes many geniuses to falter and die early, their progress is troubled. Sect leader Pei needs to take great care. I had to speak my mind. If I have offended, sect leader Pei, please bear with me. Hearing this, Pei Yuan Ran was shocked. He stood and gave a deep bow to old He, the concerned words of old He, how can this one not know? This one will remember deep in the heart. Xian Yan and Yan Lu also gravely stood and made a bow towards old He. The mood of Wukong Hall became tense. Old He's words had stirred the thoughts of many people. Every sect would have some outstanding disciples, but just like old He had said, these talented disciples all had troubled fates. After such an incident had occurred, everyone didn't have the interest in conversing, and after ordering a batch of golden crow pills, they made their farewells. When Shifeng Rong rushed back to Fragrant Ginger Yard and saw Zhuomo's pitiful state, she forcefully swallowed back the words of rage that had reached her mouth. But there was still barely disguised fury in her voice. From today, for 1 month, you are not allowed to enter the Dan room. Zhuomo grimaced inside. Not being allowed to enter the Dan room for a month meant that, for a month, he didn't have any source of income. Almost all of his income right now came from making golden crow pills. The ling grasses and herbs in the ling fields, other than the kind of plants like snowy foxtail grass that could not be used in dan making, he had planned on leaving the rest of the plants for him to use. But thinking that he had temporarily managed to keep his life, Zhuomo felt glad inside. Facing the furious master, Zhuomo was very unconfident and could only mutter in agreement. Coldly glancing over Zhuomo, Shifeng Rong left behind a few restorative lingdan before leaving. Zhuomo was very moved. Master might be of many cold words and faces, but she really was concerned about him. Before, he had felt unfortunate that he had such a foul-tempered master, but he now felt that his luck wasn't so bad. When Shifeng Rong rushed back to Wukong Hall, the guests had left. Pei Yuan Ran and the other two were sitting silently in Wukong Hall. Having been waiting for Shifeng Rong, Pei Yuan Ran repeated old He's words to her. Shifeng Rong also had a worried expression. If it wasn't for old He's reminder today, we have all missed this problem. Pei Yuan Ran said gravely, thinking about it now, we were truly too impatient. It was the same for Wei Xing entering the sword cave. And it happened for Zhuomo's dan making. I have already restricted him from dan making for a month. Shifeng Rong suddenly said, this matter, it was my fault for missing it. Pei Yuan Ran waved his hand, we were all at fault. Yes. Yan Lu had a regretful expression, the sales of Golden Crow Pill were too good. I got impatient because they were urging me and went to rush him. Thinking about it now, earning Jingshi is for the continued existence of the sect. If something happened to Zhuomo because of this matter, it really is a loss. We'd have lost a lot. It's good to restrict him from dan making. Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly, Shitty, supervise him in this time to practice the sword. We aren't going to hope that he would make any accomplishment on the sword. His talent isn't bad in the sword, but he has too many likes, and it's hard for him to be faithful to one. If there aren't any surprises, his achievements in the sword wouldn't be as good as Wei Xing. Everyone had achieved Jindan and could easily see this. Even Shifeng Rong nodded her head slightly. Zhuomo started out as a ling plant farmer. Then he learned dan making followed by the sword. What he had learned was extremely broad. He wasn't willing to throw away any of it, so his achievements on the sword would most likely be very limited. But Suomo's other talents are truly outstanding. If he isn't learning dan making with shimmy, his talent in dan making would be lost. We won't hope for him to cultivate the sword. We could nurture his interest in other areas, like second shitty's forging. We could try. Pei Yuan Ran continued, but old He's words reminded me today. Suomo's body is too weak. We might not put expectations on his sword skills, but we could strengthen his body and prevent something like becoming unconscious in the future. Before his body is strong, don't let him sink back into dan making. Second shitty, this will have to rely on you. Yes. Xianxia spat out a word. In the half-lidded eyes, 2 dots of cold light flashed. No one had any opinions about Pei Yuan Ran's arrangements. Even Shi Feng Rong felt that not letting Suomo sink into dan making temporarily was a correct choice. After everyone had left, a hint of worry came onto Pei Yuan Ran's face. Suomo had a problem, then Wei Xing. He was slightly regretful now of sending Wei Xing into the sword cave so early. In the dark and gloomy sword cave, Wei Xing's clothes were dyed with blood coming out of the corner of his mouth. His upper half was bare, large and small marks crisscrossing, alarming to see. Opposite to his dim and tired mental state, splitting rainbow was glowing and flashing on his hands. It was like the rainbow after the rain, the color vibrant and fresh. Wei Xing affectionately caressed the body of the sword. The 7-colored sword hummed lightly, as though it was responding to him. In total, there were 18 levels in the sword cave. Starting from the first level, he had fought his way down step by step. The devilings along the way, he hadn't let go of even one. There wasn't any slacking or tricks. Even though he already knew that, Void Sword Scripture, was on the 18th level, if he could reach the 18th level, he would be able to see the greatest art the sect founder had left behind, Void Sword Scripture. But he controlled the impulse in his heart. Steady step by steady step, one deviling after the next, he forged his sword essence. He was the very first second-generation disciple in Wukong's sword sect to comprehend sword essence, even earlier than Suomo. He had naturally comprehended it at Juji. The sword essence he had comprehended by himself. It wasn't from any kind of sword scripture, but from his daily continuous fights, his own understandings which formed his own sword essence. His sword essence, it wasn't an understanding of the sword scriptures, but an understanding of the sword. This was also why Xianxia found it troublesome and hard to teach him. This was also why, no matter if it was the stubborn Xianxia or the steady Pei Yuan Ran, they were all in favor of sending him to the sword cave. They had high expectations of him. Wei Xing, who had his own sword essence, he wasn't just the person in the sect most likely to grasp Void Sword Scripture, but the only one with hopes of reaching the level that the founder had attained. Even though Suomo had comprehended sword essence, but in the hearts of the elders, Wei Xing's talents at the sword was much higher than him. Wei Xing gently caressed the sword, his eyes resolute. His cultivation had rose furiously and in a short amount of time, reached the 8th level of Juji. But what he didn't know was that, of the past disciples that entered the sword cave, those that could enter the 8th level, none of them were below Ningmai. And him, just with his Juji cultivation, fought and killed his way to the 16th level. Starting from the 13th level, every step that he took, he needed to pay a price. But he didn't become afraid and retreat. His sword, there was no retreat, there was no hesitation. Chapter 74, Nightmares. Suomo wasn't get upset when he was restricted from Dan making for a month. To escape from imminent life-threatening danger or to make Dan for a month, it wasn't a difficult choice to make. However, when informed that his ban would be endlessly extended by his master until he satisfactorily completed Xianxia exercise training, Suomo became dumbstruck. To meet with the visiting Jindan masters was a calamity, and to receive Xianxia torture was another calamity. If Suemo had a choice, he would unhesitatingly choose the first calamity. He didn't know the strength of those Jindan masters, but he had directly experienced Xianxia's strength. He now knew what being too smart for your own good was. Master, who had always pushed him to make Dan, had suddenly reversed her position and sent down a strict order for him to go to Xianxia for special training. Before she left, she had sternly warned him, if he dishonored her in front of Xianxia, when she came back, it was, humph humph. Master's humph humph was almost as scary as second Sherbua's terrifying stare. Master had never explained what her humph humph really was, but the smile that accompanied each humph humph caused Suemo to shiver and his hair raise up. Certain that he was marching into the jaws of death, Suemo went to Xianxia's grass hut. On the way there, he warned Pu Yao countless times. Pu Yao definitely was one to hold grudges. Second Sherbua had attacked him, with this guy's ungenerous attitude, he was definitely thinking of getting revenge. Pu Yao was arrogant and wanted to reclaim his honor, saying that it was because he had been previously wounded that he had been defeated by second Sherbua. Suemo was celebrating the fact that Pu Yao hadn't recovered from his wounds yet, otherwise, he definitely would be making another mess. Didn't he know that this was a different era? After the incident with the Yin bead, Suemo had no fear of Pu Yao anymore. What Sky Yao? It was clearly an old antique that was still living in the time 3,000 years ago, and completely cut off from the present. So pitiful. Sometimes, Suemo couldn't help but pity Pu Yao. From what he saw, Pu Yao was clearly still living in the illusions of the past, and didn't want to face the cruel reality. Anyone who had been imprisoned for 3,000 years, they would probably behave the same way when they came out. Suemo thought that the incident of the Yin beads had dealt a great blow to Pu Yao. This Renyao had been dispirited for quite a few days. Afterwards, Pu Yao had offered many other things that could be used to make money, but Suemo had sympathetically yet resolutely rejected them. Regardless of sympathy, in order to avoid trouble, Suemo sternly warned Pu Yao. Suemo had initially used second Sherbua to threaten him, but seeing that there wasn't an effect, he immediately changed to using the threat of Jingshi. That was instantly effective. Pu Yao was a great consumer of Jingshi. Suemo didn't know how Pu Yao could use up so much Jingshi. But clearly, Pu Yao had at least one additional source of consumption, going to the sword cave. Pu Yao was extremely desirous of Yin energy, and in this area, only the sword cave had it. Suemo found that he had the feeling that he was raising a pet. Coming to the sunset lookout peak for the second time, the sword essences in the ground surrounding the grass hut seemed to recognize him and had completely disappeared. Second Sherbua. He shouted. Come in. Second Sherbua's icy words came out from behind the wooden door. Suemo seemed to see, behind the wooden door, second Sherbua sitting in the lotus position, his body as large as a mountain, casting a shadow over him. Feeling weak and fragile, he barely raised his head and was only being able to see a pair of indifferent and frigid eyes staring at him. Suemo couldn't help but shudder. He forced himself to throw away his delusions and calmed his mind. He pushed open the door and gathered his bravery to walk in. Sit. Second Sherbua didn't open his eyes. Just like last time, he was sitting on a meditation mat. The sunlight came in through a hole in the roof and landed on his body. Suemo saw the meditation mat in front of second Sherbua and carefully sat down, lowering his head and listening hard. Starting from today, I will teach you. Xianxia body was thin and withered, but sitting there with closed eyes, he seemed to weigh 1,000 caddies, suppressing Suemo so much he almost couldn't breathe. He didn't speak in a loud voice, but when it landed in Suemo's ears, it was like thunder. Yes. Suemo weakly responded. Even now, he didn't understand why Master and the sect leader suddenly thought of throwing him to second Sherbua. Our sect cultivates the sword, and doesn't put importance on the body. But your natural body is weak and lacking. So you must start from the physical body. Xian Yen Sherbua didn't open his eyes, yet a strong presence was carried with his light words. It announced the beginning of Zhuo Mo's tragic life. The mountain slopes of Wukong Mountain wasn't steep, but because of the winding mountain path, it took almost 6 hours to climb up on foot. The outer sect disciples of Wukong Sword sect had suddenly found that Mo Shixiang would walk on the mountain path, panting heavily, sweat running down his back, as he went up and down. A few days later, a backpack appeared on Mo Shixiang's back. It was still up and down. Looking at Shixiang struggling up the mountain path, some outer sect disciples wanted to help but were sworn at by Mo Shixiang. All the outer sect disciples were puzzled. Was Shixiang masochistic? Each day, Mo wanted to cry. He didn't have the patience to treat others politely. Far away, standing at the highest point on the mountain, Xian Yen Shixiang was supervising him. Mo didn't dare to slack off even the slightest bit. Such a stupid method, your trash of a Sherbua is actually using such a dumb method. Pu Yao laughed continuously at his misfortunes. Mo gritted his teeth and raised his legs. His entire body was covered in sweat. Every time his bare foot touched the stone stairs, it would leave behind a wet footprint. He didn't pay attention to Pu Yao. He wasn't afraid that second Sherbua would find out, but because he didn't have the energy to talk. Now that he was thinking of those body cultivators, he asked himself, why didn't he think of cultivating the body? Each step he took, he could barely make it. If he stopped to rest it at all, it meant that this round was wasted, and that he would face a multiplied punishment. Second Sherbua's eyes were really terrifying, to be able to see so clearly from that far away. Every time he thought about it, he would wail inside. Second Sherbua, do you really have the free time to guarding a little character like me every day? Isn't it unprofitable? Don't you need to meditate, cultivate the sword, forge something? Do you want me to teach you a body cultivation art? Pu Yao snickered. Speaking of body cultivation, Mo are the true masters. Those in your Xiuzha that cultivate the body, you all learned it completely from the Mo, but you really didn't copy it well. As the true allies of the Mo, I have a profound inheritance of body cultivation. Includes teaching and learning, would be beneficial for a lifetime, definitely without side effects. Mo was too lazy to respond to him. He bared his teeth, used all the energy in his body to move upward step by step. Pu Yao laughed even more merrily. At the top of the eastern peak, Xiaoguo watched Mo Shixiang struggle up the winding mountain path. Her heart was deeply moved. She tightened her pink fists, determination written on her apple face. Shixiang is so strong yet so hard-working, Xiaoguo needs to work harder. She turned and left, deciding to multiply her practice time today. If Mo knew of Xiaoguo's thoughts, he would definitely wail to the heavens, Gu is being forced. In reality, his mind was entirely blank. After the energy was used up, a person's reaction times and thoughts would become slower. The second half of the ascent, it was completely instinctive. Mo couldn't even distinguish what Pu Yao was saying. When he finally reached the mountaintop, without a word, second Sherbua picked him up and flew to fragrant ginger yard. In the yard, a large wooden tub had been set up over a large metal pot. The wooden tub was filled with a black liquid, the smell of herbs could be detected a long way off. Su Qing was standing next to the wooden tub. Seeing second Sherbua holding Mo, she hurriedly lit the fire. Without a word, Xian Yen Sherbua threw Mo carelessly into the wooden tub before floating away. Splash! Like a ball of mud, Mo accurately landed in the wooden tub. The hot medicine bath made his pupils shrink and he inhaled sharply. At the side, Su Qing's face reddened slightly and then she said sympathetically to Mo, Shixiang, today's medicine bath costs 1 piece of third-grade jingsher. The master said that it will be put on the accounts and for you to pay back in time. Mo's expression was fierce and twisted as he nodded, it really was too hot. He needed to pay for the medicine bath each day. They were really too miserly. Wasn't this forcing him to owe debts? But after the last few days, Mo knew it was useless to rebel and could only grit his teeth and accept it. Additionally, the effect of these medicine baths were extremely evident. If he didn't have it, Mo certainly couldn't finish the amount of training that second Shibwa assigned. Then he would have to face an even more terrifying punishment. Sometimes, Mo had the feeling that second Shibwa and master were in cahoots. Su Qing was even more sympathetic as she reminded Mo, Xixiang, I need to increase the fire. A short while later, wails like pigs being slaughtered echoed through fragrant ginger yard. The female disciples that were working at the front of the yard all sympathetically turned to look and exchanged glances before sighing, really pitiful. Then they buried their heads to continue their own work. After the medicine bath, Mo seemed to sleepwalk back to the little west wind yard. The nightmare of the day finally ended. He wanted to drop and sleep. The bones in his body seemed to want to collapse, but he still forced himself to meditate in the rock room. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation didn't do anything special for the recovery of his body, but for nurturing the mind, it was very effective. Mo was suspicious. If he didn't have embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he might not die from exhaustion, but he would first go insane from exhaustion. He entered meditation extremely quickly. Time also flew quickly. When he opened his eyes, his body was still sore, but the feeling that his mind was blank had disappeared. It felt that he could control his body again. The medicine bath had been prepared by master. Supposedly, the more exhausted he was, the more effectively the medicine would nurture the muscles. With a hint of reluctance and helplessness, he stood. What he needed to do now was get to Sunset Lookout Peak before sunrise. If he was late, it would be very bad. At this time, the sky hadn't lightened, and was a patch of black. The mountain paths were still cold. The night sky above his head, Mo flew toward Sunset Lookout Peak, the stars above him mischievously shining. Sprinting in the wind, Mo only had one thought, this nightmare, please end quickly. He wanted to go back to his previous life of farming and dam-making. Even practicing the sword in the river was much better than this. Right now, he was counting the days on his hand. And what made him despair the most was what master had said before leaving, only when second Shibwa was satisfied. Second Shibwa satisfied. He had countless reasons to believe, in the eyes of the terrifying second Shibwa, this was just the beginning. Just as Mo was living through a tragic life, a shocking incident happened in Dongfu and Dongfu shook. Chapter 75, Haze. The atmosphere was tense and heavy in Dongfu Hall, each person's face black. Wounds could be seen on some people. In front of them silently laid the corpse of Yuanli. It was a strange gray-green color. Yunxia Xianxi's eyes showed extreme sorrow. She, who was usually steady, couldn't help but feel trepidation. To search for the traces of the Yaoma who could force the stars in daytime, they had taken turns searching in Dongfu. Yet no one could have thought that they would encounter an ambush today. This definitely had been an extremely well-planned ambush. The enemy's target was Yuanli. There were many of them, all of them masked, and with astounding cultivation. Their cooperation was also extremely tight. Yunli was almost killed instantly. At that time, Yunxia Xianxi had been extremely close to Yunli. If she had hesitated in throwing out the Yin Thunder bead that she had just forged, she would also have been affected by the other's attack. It was only by relying on the Yin Thunder bead that she had barely avoided an ordeal. Who were those people? Tian Songzi's face was black. As the true ruler of Dongfu, to have someone publicly attack his allies in his lands was undoubtedly a provocation to him. Yunxia Xianxi calmed down her mind and said, with lingering fears, I don't know. They didn't use flying swords. All they used was 5 elemental smoke. In combination with their formations, it was extremely powerful. 5-element smoke. Old He raised his head in slight shock. He hadn't gone today. He said gravely, most of the people who use 5-elemental smoke are roaming show, and it's not easy to collect such a thing. That might not be true. At this time, when Tai Sanren said heavily, it might be that they are trying to misleading us. It might not be easy to collect 5-elemental smoke, but it can occasionally be bought on the market. If someone really tried, it's not impossible. Their target was Mr. Yuan. So we have to determine their motives. Why would they target Mr. Yuan? Everyone who sat here was a veteran and their thoughts fell along the same lines. Tian Songzi instantly realized and followed up, they don't want us to keep investigating the stars in daytime. Yes. This point needs to be pondered. Old He opened, if they were here to pick up some benefits, stir the waters up, and then steal it away, then they would hope that we could find that Yamo. Who wouldn't want us to find that Yamo? That Yamo? Wuxia Xianxia suddenly became alert, or the associates of the Yamo. The others stared at one another, their faces instantly dark. The people that had attacked them had clearly been part of the same group and clearly couldn't be that wounded Yamo. It was very likely that they were associates of the Yamo. Before, they had assumed that it was only one wounded Yamo, so no one had treated it seriously. With the power of so many Jindan masters, wouldn't it have been easy to exterminate one injured Yamo? No one could have predicted that the situation would have changed so quickly. It was basically impossible to conceal the matter of the stars in daytime. Large numbers of Xiozha had hoped to hunt and kill the Yamo and had furiously gathered in Sky Moon Jia. A wounded high-grade Yamo meant countless Jingxia and countless talismans. There are actually Xiozha that have allied with the Yamo. When Tai Sanren was furious. Old He raised his head and said, why couldn't it be a group of Yamo? Once the words came out, the enormous Dong Fu Hall fell silent. Wuxia Xianxia tiredly went back to her residence. Xiao Huan, seeing her mistress' expression, said with concern and terror, Miss, why don't we leave? The matters here are very frightening. Wuxia grimaced, how can we leave now? If we don't conclude this matter, we will let down the deceased Mr. Yuan. Xiao Huan bit her lips and said resolutely, then I will go find beads for Miss. If Miss has a few more thunder beads, then there's no need to fear them. Silly girl. Wuxia patted Xiao Hun's head and said affectionately, getting a bargain the first one, how can you think you will get the bargain every time? In any case, I can't help Miss otherwise. Xiao Huan's eyes became misty. The two might formally be master and servant, but in reality they were like sisters. Your Miss isn't that weak. At the least, I'm a Jindan. Wuxia hurriedly comforted Xiao Huan, but she was unconfident inside. Old He's words circled in her heart. She knew that the situation in Blood Sky Metropolis Jia was worsening but didn't know how bad it actually was. If the Yamo had really infiltrated Sky Moon Jia, then how bad was the situation in Blood Sky Metropolis Jia? At some unknown time, a drizzle of rain had started falling outside the room. Looking at the faraway mountains enveloped in the rain, the haze in Wuxia Xianxia's heart was just as heavy. Suemo had been correct. His tragic life had just started. Old He's good-intentioned reminder combined with Suemo's clever feinting, it had alarmed Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Only geniuses who were alive were able to become true masters. In the eyes of Pei Yuan, Shi Feng Rong and the others, Suemo didn't lack for talent. More so, they thought that Suemo still had hidden talents that were waiting to be discovered. However, his fragile body limited his development. Dying prematurely was something that was likely to befall him. In comparison, Wei Sheng was almost too strong in this area and didn't need their concern at all. Pei Yuan Ran and the others, after being advised, found that their initial thoughts were incorrect. For someone as multi-talented as Suemo, it wasn't important to cultivate the sword, it was important for him to keep his life. Rather than nurture him into an average sword cultivator, it was much better to make him an extremely healthy turtle. The upper levels of Wukong's sword sect sank into simultaneous reflection. Consequently, Xianxia personally stepped forward. From this, it was possible to see how important Wukong's sword sect thought Sui Mo was. After the nightmarish cultivation, Sui Mo's body had improved. Even though it still appeared thin, but there was some more muscles on his bones. Under the double influence of intense training and the medicinal liquid, he had gradually gotten used to the body cultivation. It was a pity that Sui Mo didn't understand what his master and the other Shibwa were thinking. Xianxia Shibwa personally teaching him, shocked and pained him at the same time. In all the elders, Xianxia was the strictest and the one Sui Mo was afraid of the most. How good would it be if it had been Yen Lu Shibwa? Sui Mo couldn't help but fantasize sometimes. In the grass hut, Xianxia threw a jade scroll at Sui Mo and led him to a valley in the back of the mountain. Sui Mo had came to this valley before. It evidently had just been flattened and there was an eye-catching seal formation at the bottom of the valley. Without a second word, he threw Sui Mo into the seal formation. Shibwa, what is this? Sui Mo asked, slightly panicked. Xianxia Shibwa didn't pay attention to him and floated away. Sui Mo looked in alarm at the surroundings. However, as nothing happened, his heart slowly calmed. Was this some body-strengthening seal formation? Such a good thing, why didn't they take it out earlier? For a while, nothing happened. However, Sui Mo didn't dare to run out of the seal formation of his own accord. Shibwa had thrown him in, if he ran out, the outcome would be bad. So he started to look at the jade scroll that Shibwa gave him. There was a body cultivation scripture in the jade scroll. It was called, Vajra Profound Sutra. Sui Mo was slightly shocked. From the name, it didn't look like one of the sect's scriptures, but more like the scriptures of Dhyana cultivators. Where did Shibwa get this? During his 2 years in the outer sect, he suffered through hardships trying to gather jade scrolls. Sui Mo held a special fondness for jade schools that recorded new things. This time he didn't need to spend contribution points to get this scroll. Sui Mo finally felt that he hadn't suffered for nothing. Curious, he kept on reading. As expected, it was a Dhyana Shio scripture. The scriptures of Dhyana Shio were mostly simple and their demands on personal talent were the lowest. However, what they demanded of determination and personality was much higher. This scripture was the same. There wasn't many complex parts but what it needed was constancy. If this would be constantly cultivated, the body would be like gold metal, and if one could comprehend, the final level would be forming the Vajrapani's indestructible body. Of course, Sui Mo snorted at that. These days, no matter what jade scroll, they would always talk about how strong they were. It was the same as Pu Yao always labeling himself a Sky Yao. However, what Sui Mo found interesting was, Vajra Profound Sutra, mentioned that the body would not be easily wounded. No matter what the circumstances, the most important was to stay alive. If it would be somewhat mastered, Yaoma would be unable to approach near him, and nothing evil would be able to infiltrate. Sui Mo suddenly found, what he was learning was more and more varied. This kind of second-hand item, he's not ashamed to take it out. Pu Yao somehow came out and said with a face full of disdain. Second-hand? Sui Mo raised the jade scroll in his hand, do you have it? I only keep the finest. Pu Yao said proudly. Like the yin bead? Sui Mo smirked. Pu Yao was like a deflated balloon. The incident of the yin beads had become Sui Mo's most effective weapon. Pu Yao didn't have any room to argue. But when he looked at the seal formation surrounding them, he started to snicker. Sui Mo's heart started to feel unconfident and couldn't resist asking, what are you laughing about? Pu Yao's crimson red eye held a strange laughter at Sui Mo's misfortunes. Sui Mo was very familiar with this expression. He had seen this expression too many times recently. Sui Mo couldn't help but feel something was wrong. Have a good time. Pu Yao was full of smugness as he went back into Zhuo Mo's consciousness. Zhuo Mo felt even more unconfident. Looking at the seal surrounding him, his heart trembled. Maybe this seal formation wasn't a body-strengthening seal formation. At this time, suddenly a faint mist formed in the surroundings. Zhuo Mo saw it clearly. The mist had been created by the seal formation. He instantly became nervous. Was it about to begin? The mist quickly spread. He couldn't see in front of him and became even more cautious. Hiss! A sword energy suddenly came out of the mist and shot at him. Zhuo Mo, already on the defense, sliced out with his hand, a sword energy leaving and accurately hitting the sword energy that was flying at him. Ping! A light flashed and the two sword energies destroyed each other. Before Zhuo Mo could react, hiss, two other sword energies came out of the mist. Zhuo Mo didn't dare to drop his defenses and flung out two sword energies. Hiss. Four sword energies came at him from different directions. He dodged left and weaved right, an extremely sorry figure. The sword energies increased in number at an astounding speed, so fast that Zhuo Mo couldn't react. When the sword energy entered his body, the needling pain caused Zhuo Mo to howl. Zhuo Mo finally understood what this damned seal formation was. Chapter 76, Body Cultivating Sword Formation. A sword formation. This was actually a sword formation. Damn it, why did Shibua throw him into a sword formation? Zhuo Mo suddenly thought of the jade scroll in his hand. If the muscles on his face weren't paralyzed, his expression right now would be deathly pale. Body cultivation. To use a sword formation to cultivate the body, which bastard thought of this idea? Zhuo Mo wanted to kill them. He wasn't dumb. Actually, when he had thought of the Vajra Profound Sutra on his hands, he instantly understood. These sword energies were extremely small and non-fatal, but they were exceptionally painful when they hit him. Hard for a normal flying sword to wound. Zhuo Mo suddenly thought of the phrase and his little heart shook. Was it necessary to first be pierced by countless flying swords to create a thick skin and then cultivate the hard to be wounded by flying swords? He almost fainted at the idea. However, he felt that this idea was probably the truth. In the first wave of swords, Zhuo Mo had been struck 7 times. It was so painful he howled. Thankfully, the sword formation gave him time to breathe. The mist gradually dissipated, yet Zhuo Mo didn't relax at all. He quickly took out Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't guess wrong, the next storm of swords would be coming in a short while. Xin Yen Shibua's habits were like his sword, he wouldn't give people time to rest. Unfortunately, Zhuo Mo had guessed right. Just as he read a bit of the contents, the second storm of swords started. With no attention to spare for anything else, he suddenly jumped up and the sword energies left continuously from his hand. Even though he had comprehended sword essence, he was still struck 12 times during the second wave. This time, he didn't make a sound. Inside, he repeatedly cursed Shibua and unhesitatingly started Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't successfully do one round of Vajra Profound Sutra, before the third sword storm came, he would just be ripe pickings. He almost couldn't deal with the second wave of swords. 12 strikes. The pain reached his bones. Thankfully, the language of Vajra Profound Sutra was straightforward and simple to practice. Before the third wave arrived, Zhuo Mo finally completed one round of the Vajra Profound Sutra. A faint gold color appeared on his skin. Before he could admire himself, the third wave of swords silently arrived. Like the rain hitting the leaves, the pia pia rang out in his ears. As expected, the pain lessened. However, this wave of swords were much denser than the last 2 waves. Zhuo Mo might have the Vajra scripture but was still dumbstruck. He didn't know how many times he was hit. In a daze, he could only hear Pu Yao's extremely happy roars of laughter. When Xian Yen Shibwa carried a swollen Zuemo back to the Little West Wind Yard, the outer sect disciples along the way that saw the scene all had the same expression: Zuemo Shixiang is very pitiful. After they had seen Zuemo abuse himself on the mountain roads every day, they didn't find it strange anymore. Of course, there were still rumors. Like Zuemo Shixiang had offended Xian Yen Shishu, so Xian Yen Shishu was exceptionally angry and was personally administering punishment. Or that Zuemo Shixiang was practicing a kind of legendary art. This legendary art was exceptionally cruel and that the female disciples in Fragrant Ginger Yard could prove it. When Zuemo had finally recovered in his own little yard, what welcomed him was the sympathetic gaze of the gray-beaked goose on the rooftop. Zuemo climbed up self-mockingly. He finally could rest for a few days. Before leaving, Shibwa had said that he would come back in 5 days. Clearly, the sword formation was not suited to being used every day. He also needed time to practice Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't improve before next time, he would die a terrible death. Vajra Profound Sutra had a slight healing effect. After practicing it for a little while, Zuemo felt his entire body had become warm. This shocked him slightly. In the scriptures he had practiced before, the most comfortable was embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. It was hard to describe the feeling of void. The feelings this time wasn't as enchanting as cultivating, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, but for Zuemo who was presently wounded, the warm feeling was actually more appropriate. Also, because it was easier to learn, there were no bottlenecks in Vajra Profound Sutra. It wasn't like embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, which always made him spit blood. After practicing for 4 hours, Zuemo's entire body was amazingly relaxed, the marks on his body had also faded. Zuemo was overjoyed. He went to the ling fields inside the valley and felt heartache as he looked at the ling grasses in the fields. He hadn't taken care of the fields for quite a few days. Some of the more sensitive plants seemed slightly wilted. Zuemo gritted his teeth and harvested all those ling grasses that were sensitive and near maturity. He decided to sell all of them. The remaining ling grasses were hardier plants. It was rare for Shibwa to have mercy. With a vacation of 5 days, Zuemo could finally take a breath. Even though he knew that the reprieve was temporary and he would once again enter the nightmare after 5 days, he still planned on enjoying these 5 days. Listening to the sound tablet, Zuemo hummed a little tune, his head on his arms as he looked at the jade scrolls that Elder Wei Nan had left. As soon as he relaxed, he couldn't help but think of making jingsha. There was no way around it. After soaking in the medicine baths every day, he was in the midst of a great amount of debt and owed master a lot of jingsha. And now that he was restricted from the Dan room, he couldn't make the golden crow pill and had no income. Not only that, he also couldn't make any progress on the new Ling Dan. He suddenly thought of the water method that had been mentioned in Elder Wei Nan's jade scrolls. The number of ways to make Dan in the world could not be counted. The fire method was the most widespread, and methods involving water and wood were more esoteric. Elder Wei Nan's knowledge was broad and he was extremely skilled at using whatever was available in the environment to create the greatest value. Zuemo admired this very much. In many cases, a person's circumstances would have all kinds of limitations, and those limits could not be changed. To use disadvantageous circumstances to create good results was undoubtedly an area worthy of deep study. There was a cold spring in the rock room. It was acceptable for the water method. Most of the dan that could be made by the water method leaned towards the yin and the cold. This was a limit of the water method. But for Zuemo, he didn't have any other choice. There were many dan recipes involving the water method in the scrolls of Elder Wei Nan. Zuemo scanned through and picked a few dan that he could make now, noting down what was needed. It seemed that he needed to go to Dongfu. Even though he had heavy debts, but he didn't need to pay them off immediately, so Zhuo still had some jingsha in his pocket. If he sold the ling grasses, which he wasn't planning on letting the sect sell for him, he would get some more jingsha. He only had 5 days of vacation. It would take too long if the sect sold it, and no one could know that he had gone to Dongfu to buy materials. If Master knew he was secretly making Dan, Master's humph would probably start taking effect. As to the outcome, he didn't need to even think about it. Disguising his appearance and concealing his tracks, Zhuo had become familiar with doing both. The effects of the recent training were extremely evident. Zhuo flew as he walked, and no longer resembled the weak zombie of the past. He changed his appearance this time to a mundane-looking man. He was very familiar with Dongfu. The quality of the ling grasses he had wasn't the best, but since he was a ling plant farmer, it was still much better than what normal cultivators could grow, so they sold very quickly. He then brought some of the raw materials for the water method. After finishing what he needed to do, his mind relaxed as he started to wander around. Xiao Huan's expression was panicked. She spent every day guarding the free market, waiting for the person that had sold her the yin beads. After some time, she rented a stall, and after paying a high price, she hung up a sign, purchasing yin beads at high prices. She believed, if that waxy-looking man saw the sign, he would come find her. She had been frightened by Miss encountering dangers. When she found out that Miss had only survived due to the yin bead that she had brought the last time, she knew how to help Mississippi. If she could buy a few more yin beads, and Miss could forge more yin thunder beads, then she wouldn't have to worry so much. She regretted very much that she hadn't brought more the first time. She stood guard every day, but she never encountered the yellow-skinned man. She couldn't help but look at a nearby stall. The stall owner was a youth. His sign was also, buying yin beads at high price. Xiao Huan was irritated. She recognized the youth. He was a disciple of Wen Tai Sanren. Many people had seen Miss use the yin thunder bead, and the origins of the yin bead wasn't a secret. It wasn't just Yun Xia that knew how to make yin thunder beads. The method of making yin beads had been lost long ago, but the method of making yin thunder beads wasn't hard to find. Additionally, yin beads wasn't just limited to making yin thunder beads. 3,000 years ago, there had been a sect called Deviling's sect which had specialized in making yin beads. Of the various beads that could be made from yin beads, there were also yin thunder beads and yin fire beads as well as others. But the most famous of the Deviling's sect was the Nine Heaven Devilings formation. The Nine Heaven Devilings formation, it was formed using 3,600 beads of various kinds to form the formation. This was a terrifying formation that could even kill Fanshu cultivators. In the past, other than selling yin beads, the Deviling's sect would also sell already made beads as well as simple spells to make them. So things like the yin thunder bead had spread out. Due to the power of the yin thunder bead, and the ease of making them, many shouja would always have some. In the Great Battle 3,000 years ago, the entire Deviling's sect had nearly been exterminated. The method of making the yin beads had been lost, but the method of making the yin thunder bead had been passed on. In reality, other than Wen Tai Sanren, the others were also trying to buy yin beads. But the others were not as straightforward as Wen Tai Sanren. They hired locals to buy yin beads. Xiao Huan was especially irritated when she saw Wen Tai Sanren's disciples' disdainful attitude towards her. Shameless. She cursed for the nth time, but because the others' cultivation was higher than her, she couldn't do anything. It naturally aroused the attentions of all the powers in the free market when a large group of people who wanted to buy yin beads appeared. No matter how much they asked, they still didn't know what yin beads were. Some brave fellows took some beads to make forgeries of yin beads. The result was they were beaten until they were crippled. After a few days, the local snakeheads knew that this group wasn't easy to deal with, and so no one tried again. So when Zhuo wandered to the free market, and saw a continuous forest of signs saying, buying yin beads at high prices, he was instantly dumbstruck. Chapter 77 Plots. Ymo stared dazedly at the patches of signs in the free market. Pu Yao's countenance was extremely smug and arrogant. The depression over the recent failure sweeping away as he said, "See, I said so. Beads are very valuable." Ymo gradually regained his focus. As he swept his gaze across the market, he saw the little girl that had brought beads from him the previously. The little girl seemed quite panicked. Did she need the beads desperately? Ymo couldn't help but speculate inside. The little girl had been very kind, so Ymo had a good impression of her. It appeared that the beads were useful. Last time, when the little girl had come, she had only brought one out of kindness. At that time, she probably didn't recognize beads. Ymo ruminated about selling them. Ymo didn't pay attention to Pu Yao. Walking in front of the little girl, he said, "You're buying beads. How many?" Just at this time, Pu Yao suddenly said in a grave tone, "Run." Ymo paused. Who would have thought that this little town of Dongfu was concealing so much? Even something that has been lost for so long, like beads, also appeared, a slightly piercing voice said reflectively. The person who spoke was the yellow-robed Taoist. "Yes. I was also very surprised when I learned about it," the silver-clad man said, a flash of puzzlement running through his eyes. "The Deviling sect has been dead for so many years, how can a successor have appeared?" "It's not easy guessing about a sect succession." The yellow-robed Taoist's eyes followed the silver-clad male closely. "Why do you not find someone else?" The silver-clad male's expression was normal. "The others? They can't do it." The yellow-robed Taoist smiled smugly. "Exactly. Except for you and I, the others are only average. They cannot do anything and will ruin things." "Are you sure the person who is selling the beads will definitely appear?" "I am not sure." The silver-clad male shook his head. The yellow-robed Taoist's expression changed, his pupils suddenly shrank. "You are making fun of me?" The silver-clad male was not affected. "I've shared the information with you. If you do not find it useful, you can leave. The method of making the beads, it is worthy of you waiting a while." The yellow-robed Taoist stared at the silver-clad male for a long while before suddenly laughing. "You're right. The Deviling sect was so famous in the past, what they relied on wasn't just the way to make beads. Haha, if I can find this person, all of the techniques of the Deviling sect would land in our hands." "Don't be happy this early," the silver-clad male said, "there are probably many that have the same idea as us." "Humph. They dare to steal from me, they are courting death." The yellow-robed Taoist icily said. "It's best to be careful. Even those people from Bright Wave Jia were ambushed and one was killed." The brow of the silver-clad male furrowed. He felt extremely puzzled by that incident. Even though he had said clever words, but he was still extremely wary of the group from Bright Wave Jia. Additionally, he had needed Yuan Li to find the Yamo. He was very clear about Yuan Li's abilities, but no one could have thought that Yuan Li would die in an ambush. That had ruined his arrangements. Who was it that had killed Yuan Li? This ambush, which had a clearly targeted Yuan Li, had instantly turned everything into a mess. Now that Yuan Li had been killed, his sect definitely would be angry. The branch of the Master of Bright Wave Jia would not tolerate this kind of action. If this situation dragged on, there would definitely be large numbers of high-level Xiozhia that would arrive and complicate the situation. If that happened, then he would lose the chance to benefit from this incident. He had reacted extremely quickly and changed direction when he had seen a shift. The news that Wuxia Xianxia had relied on a thunder bead to escape the ambush had spread through Dongfu. The attentions of many people had been aroused, including himself. Just at this time, he made a sound, and his eyes were looking at a male standing in front of a stall. "What?" The yellow-robed Taoist became alert. "Did you find something?" "He seems to have arrived." The silver-clad male stared at the average-looking man. Him. Following the eyes of the silver-clad male, the yellow-robed Taoist also looked at Suemo that was in front of Xiao Huan's stall, a little guy with a cultivation of Zhuji. That's not likely. The gaze of the silver-clad male didn't move, as he informed, that little girl is the maid of Wuxia Xianxia. Last time, it was her that bought the yin beads. There are so many stalls in the market, but that person didn't go to anyone else but straight to hers. It's suspicious, it really is suspicious. By this time, the yellow-robed Taoist also understood, and a glimmer of greed flashed in his eyes. It wasn't just the two of them that had noticed this. Just as Suemo went to leave, a young person appeared behind him. Do you want to sell yin beads? Why don't you sell to me and we can negotiate the price? Suemo, who had received Pu Yao's warning, instantly noticed the many gazes that had gathered on his person. He became alarmed and knew that the situation was dangerous. It was a good thing that the yin beads could be sold for a good price, but if he had to pay with his life in the process, then he wasn't willing. I don't have yin beads. Seeing the situation, Suemo quickly pretended to be ignorant. I just noticed that you guys have been putting up stalls here for many days and was curious. What sort of treasure is this yin bead? How much is it worth? Do you have an example? Can you let me take a look? If I encounter it, I wouldn't pass on a chance to get rich, really. The young person smiled coldly. Then why didn't you come ask me, but went straight to her? Xiao Huan couldn't resist anymore. Her brows raising, she said angrily, the one named Shui, what do you mean? Why can't he come to this lady's stall? This youth was Wen Tai Sanren's disciple. He was called Shui Yun. Xiao Huan always found him to be an eyesore. This one doesn't mean to suggest anything, Shui Yun smirked icily. This one is only working on behalf of my master. Something as good as yin beads, they can't all go to one person. Suemo gave a smile. You must have misunderstood. I don't have yin beads. The young man had a cultivation of Ningmai and wasn't someone that a little Zhuji cultivator could battle against. Suemo wasn't dumb. He understood that, if he really took out the yin beads right now then he really would die. He definitely wouldn't get yin beads, and the other certainly would try to force out the spell to form yin beads. Otherwise, he wouldn't be let go. Don't have yin beads. Shui Yun snorted, that will have to be determined after I search you. Xiao Huan stood resolutely in front of Suemo and said angrily, you dare. She wasn't stupid. If Shui Yun hadn't come, she might not have recognized Suemo, but Shui Yun's behavior made her look closely. She found that, while this person's appearance was different, but his figure was similar to the person from last time. Shui Yun looked disdainfully at Xiao Huan. You're just a maid. Do you think yourself important? Finishing, he didn't look at Xiao Huan and strode towards Suemo. Suemo saw that the situation could not be resolved, and thought that with his pitiful and weak speed even if he were to run he would most likely be unsuccessful. He really had bad luck today. Suemo grimaced inside. As expected, it was risky trying to make Jingshi like this and he needed to be cautious. Looking at Shui Yun who seemed extremely certain, Suemo's eyes darkened, murderous intent was rising inside. The other's cultivation far surpassed his and he didn't think he could win even with trickery. Noticing the confidence on the young man's face, he decided to give the other a little surprise. His eyes staring fixedly at Shui Yun, the Ling energy in his body moved furiously. He was waiting for Shui Yun to come near and what would welcome Su Yu would be Suemo's strongest sword attack, Li Water burning heavens. Just at this time, suddenly someone interrupted, haha, no wonder Wen Tai Sanren isn't respected. It can be understood from seeing his disciple, Shui Yun's expression instantly changed. His eyes darkened, he stopped in his steps and shouted loudly, who is this? Your words are really frightening. Why do you hide? Do you not dare to come out? Just someone like you, are you enough for ye to come out? The voice was faint and one could not locate the source. Shui Yun's expression finally changed, and there was shock in his eyes. He had focused on listening just now but still couldn't find where the voice came from. This meant that the other's cultivation was much higher than his. While Shui Yun was in shock, a figure suddenly leapt at Sui Mo. "You dare!" Several shouts sounded out simultaneously. Swords flashed and several bright lights could be seen as flying swords flew at the figure. All of these people were all highly skilled. Although their target wasn't him, the sharp sword essence inside the sword energy was enough to make Sui Mo's skin hurt. He was extremely shocked inside. Only now did he realize that the nondescript bead had such a shockingly high value. Pu Yao did have something valuable in his possession. At such a dangerous time, such a nonsensical thought had floated through Sui Mo's mind. There were thousands of sword energies that formed a net, but they didn't harm Sui Mo one bit. The cultivation of the figure wasn't normal either. A faint green flying sword flashed and formed a net of light in front of him, barely stopping the other flying swords. The figure suddenly disappeared from his spot. Being alone, he naturally wasn't a match for the group. Just as everyone was attacking this person, a dark red rope was silently nearing Sui Mo. The silver-clad male was the first to find it. He snorted icily, wanting to take advantage of the fight. "It won't be that easy." He pointed with a hand and a silver light struck the dark red rope. The dark red rope wasn't an average grade talisman. Like a wave, the dark red rope fluttered and then dissipated the silver light. The silver-clad male didn't waste words. His silver-hooked sword turned into an extremely thin silver light, and like a snake climbing a tree, circled and constricted around the dark red rope. The yellow-robed Taoist and the figure who had leapt at Sui Mo were engaged in battle with each other. The figure seemed to be shrouded in a ball of smoke. No one could clearly see his appearance. The shape of his body changed rapidly. The yellow-robed Taoist evidently was taking the fight seriously. The yellow-gold flying sword was like a sun streaking in the sky, the light radiating from it was blinding. Each move was large and vast, extremely powerful. No one was able to approach near Sui Mo and Xiao Huan. The pitiful Shui Yun had, instantly been sliced by these swords into minced meat. Xiao Huan's face was pale and she was dazed as she looked at the sky. Those sword energies and talismans, she almost couldn't stand under their presence. At this time, she suddenly thought that the person who was standing beside her had a lower cultivation than her. Even she was having a hard time, would he be able to bear it? Xiao Huan was certain that this was the person who had sold her the beads the last time. Thinking that she had pulled someone else into this terrible situation, she couldn't help but feel guilty. As her pale face turned back, she saw the person behind her standing with a bowed head with his hands covered by his sleeves. Seemingly having noticed her gaze, the other suddenly raised his head and smiled at her. A smile that was as cold as the edge of a blade appeared strangely. Xiao Huan felt a gust of cold air suddenly rise from the bottom of her feet. Just at this time, a hand appeared without warning on Sui Mo's shoulder. Chapter 78, Making a Move. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. When Tai Sanren had his disciple in the light purchasing the beads, while he himself was concealed in the darkness. When he saw that Wuxia Xianxia had thunder beads, it was like he was struck by lightning. The many uses of beads were known to all the sections. Many people know, but there were not many people that would know more than Wen Tai Sanren. In the eyes of the world, Wen Tai Sanren's origins were very mysterious. Everyone knew that he came from a small sect called Sky Fiend Sect, but it was not known that the little minor sect of Sky Fiend Sect was a branch sect which had survived the collapse of the Deviling Sect. The Deviling Sect was a famous sect 3,000 years ago. There had been many disciples and many branch sections. The Deviling Sect had all died in the great battle against the Yaoma 3,000 years ago, but many of these branch sects had luckily survived. However, without the beads, the various spells they had learned from the Deviling Sect were useless. This caused some branches to decline and eventually die out. Some branches, of their own initiative, learned spells from other sects and managed to survive. The Sky Fiend sect that Wen Tai Sanren came from was one of the surviving branch sections. Sky Fiend sect was a very small sect. As it passed down to his generation, only he was left. However, Wen Tai Sanren was exceptionally talented. Even though the scriptures of the Sky Fiend sect weren't anything special, he had managed to cultivate to Jindan. However, he had reached a dead end in his cultivation and it would be hard to make progress relying on these scriptures. So, it could be understood just how joyful he was when he saw the Yin Thunder bead in Wuxia and Xianxia's hands. He knew where his sect's scriptures had originated from. The sect records had many spells relating to the Yin beads. Those strange scriptures and spells, they were hundreds of times better than the scriptures was currently using. If he could find the method to make Yin beads, he had hopes that he could break through to Yuanying. For Xianxia, the strength of cultivation directly determined their lifespan. Jindan was the first division. Before reaching Jindan their lifespan wouldn't surpass 150 years, but once they broke into Jindan they would have a lifespan of 300 years. Yuanying Xianxia would have a lifespan of 500 years. The lifespan of a Fanshu Xianxia could reach 700 years, and the lifespan of a Desheng Xianxia was 1,000 years. On the surface, Wen Tai Sanren didn't seem any different than any other middle-aged person, but he was already 232 years old. He didn't have much time left. So when he learned that someone knew how to make Yin beads, how could he not be excited? He quickly found out the history of the Yin Thunder bead that Wuxia and Xianxia had, and he had sent Shui Yun to bravely go to the free market to search for the Yin beads, while he would hide in the shadows. For the temptation of the Yin beads, he was willing to not just cut ties with Wuxia's group, but if he had to pay with his life, he had to grab it. When Zuoyamo had appeared, he was excited but kept his composure. He was clear that the news of the Yin beads had spread out long ago. There were many people who wanted it. He was like an experienced hunter, patiently waiting. To be able to use a normal scripture to break into Jindan, Wen Tai Sanren wasn't the average cultivator. The situation quickly progressed according to his plans, everyone attacking in a melee battle. As the heated battle reached its climax, he finally made a move. Using his most skilled and hidden movement method, he silently appeared behind Zuomo. When his hand touched Zuomo's shoulder, even if he was an experienced hunter, he couldn't help but be excited. Wen Tai Sanren had fortuitous encounters before. When he had been a Ningmai, he had discovered an earth-based concealment method that was extremely unique. Relying on this, he had escaped life-threatening situations multiple times. He knew he had succeeded. Damn you! The yellow-robed Taoist was the first person to detect Wen Tai Sanren and instantly yelled. He didn't attend to his fight with the other Xianxia and threw out a round gold shuttle. Once the round gold shuttle left his hand, it turned into a streak of gold light and hummed as it moved. The silver-clad male snorted and tossed a handful of silver sand, which shone like the stars, towards Wen Tai Sanren. The dark red rope moved like it was alive. A nimble turn and then it streaked towards Wen Tai Sanren, shooting like a sharp arrow, howling through the air. The other person also seemed rushed. The pale green flying sword brightened and with a clear hum, sliced at Wen Tai Sanren. For Jindan masters attacking at the same time, the resulting commotion was enough to make the sky turn dark. Wen Tai Sanren wasn't panicked. A smug smile appeared at the corners of his lips. Grabbing Zuomo's shoulder he was going to cast his greatest escape spell, an earth concealment spell, when his face suddenly changed. With a painful shout, he suddenly tore his body away and retreated. On his palm, at some unknown time, a dark red flame had appeared. The flame wasn't large as it burned silently, but just in an instant, Wen Tai Sanren's right hand had turned to white bone. Ah ah ah! Sharp yells rang over Dongfu. Wen Tai Sanren's pupils were dilated, his features horrific and twisted as he curled into a ball, continuously rolling on the ground. This sudden change also shocked everyone else. Zuomo raised his head and reached out with his right hand, a finger gently pointing into the empty air. A strand of crimson flame silently floated in front of him. The round gold shuttle of the yellow-robed Taoist, the silver sand of the silver-clad male, the dark red rope, and the pale green flying sword all headed towards the dark red flame, like moths attracted to a flame. The expressions of the four people changed drastically. Just now, they had felt their talismans and flying sword had suddenly been affected by the pull of a very strong power and headed towards the silently burning crimson flame. The state of Wen Tai Sanren, who was rolling on the ground as he wailed piteously, also shocked everyone. The expression of the yellow-robed Taoist changed as he rapidly cast a spell, wanting to retrieve the round gold shuttle, but the gold shuttle only wavered slightly but still flew towards the flame. The silver-clad male was much smarter. Without another word, he retreated out of the battle. The mysterious master who had been using the dark red rope also had a good response. The rope, which had been like an arrow, suddenly slowed. Only the flying sword glowing with green light increased its presence as it sped up rather than slow down. The sword essence was thick, full of the resolution to not return. The gold shuttle and the silver sand, when they came into contact with the flame, was like mud entering the ocean, and disappeared without a sound in the fire. The cultivator who had been controlling the dark red robe tried with all his power and finally stopped the rope from moving forward, yet the tip of the rope still came into contact with the flame. Snap hiss. A string of sparks, with astounding speed, leapt on the rope and headed to the other end. The cultivator who had been hiding in the shadows was alarmed. Abandoning his rope talisman, he released it and retreated. Turning into a streak of light, he fled away. When the sparks lit up the other end of the rope, bang, the dark red rope turned to ash, scattering in the wind. The green flying sword, with its murderous sword essence, accurately struck the flame in front of Zhuo Mo's chest. There wasn't any resistance. The flying sword split the flame into two. But at the same moment, the Xianxia who had been glaring angrily in the sky suddenly spat out a ball of fresh blood, and in alarm, turned and retreated. The sword essence on the green flying sword had completely disappeared. The body of the sword had broken into tiny segments and turned to countless fragments. The yellow-robed Taoist finally lost his composure. Without being able to care for anything else, he fled in a panic. The sudden change in the situation caused all the Xianxia in the free market, visible or hidden, to gape in shock. Wen Tai Sanren, who had been rolling on the ground, had turned into a pile of dust with nothing remaining. In a short encounter, 5 Jindan masters, 1 dead, 1 wounded, 3 fleeing, how much power would this take? Everyone's eyes as they looked at Zhuo Mo all changed. The people who had been tempted by the yin beads all felt relieved that they hadn't also attacked. The enormous free market was completely silent. There was only a crimson flame burning in front of Zhuo Mo's chest. Zhuo Mo reached out with a finger. The flame turned into a string and burrowed into his finger. Xiao Huan's complexion was deathly pale, her mind dazed as she stood. Her mind was completely blank. She didn't even register Zhuo Mo's departure. Only after a long time, when her mind finally refocused, she saw Miss Pale Face, and couldn't resist anymore but fall into Miss Embrace and started crying. Just at this time, 2 yin beads dropped to the ground. Mistress and servant couldn't help but be shocked. Zhuo Mo flew forward quickly. His eyes were dark, even the blade-like smile on his face seemed to have become weak. He had leapt and flew away without anyone daring to stop him. Not one person dared to pursue him. That wasn't right. He suddenly stopped. A white-clothed Lin Qian appeared behind him. At this time, Lin Qian didn't seem as casual and harmless as when Zhuo Mo had first encountered him. All the Ling energy in his body was moving. He was like an unsheathed sword, the sword essence spreading out. His expression was grave. He didn't dare to relax as he stared fixedly at the figure that he couldn't really make out. Zhuo Mo gave a light laugh. Haha, you're pretty brave. The voice was icy. Even though it was a laugh, it didn't have a hint of emotion. If Sui Mo was conscious, he definitely would identify it as Pu Yao's voice. Pitiful Sui Mo. In the near-death situation just now, Pu Yao finally couldn't help but interfere. Lin Qian's position didn't change. His expression was defensive, positioned so he could release his strongest attack at any time. In a deep voice, he asked, "Elder's cultivation is astounding. But why would you not let others see your true face?" Pu Yao stared at Lin Qian, the mirth on his face even thicker. "Little friend, I don't have time to play with you today. But don't worry, we will meet if there is a chance in the future." Nonsensically, he threw down, "So interesting." Ha ha. Before the words landed, a ball of flame rose from his feet. Lin Qian was first taken back and then shouted, "Elder, wait." Disdain appeared in Pu Yao's eyes. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared in the air. It was like Lin Qian was released from a heavy weight. He stood in his original spot. Only now did he realize, that without noticing, his back was wet with sweat. How long has it been since he had been as nervous as this? Suddenly, his expression flickered and he disappeared in the wind. Just after Lin Qian disappeared, a group of people arrived at the location. It was a group clothed in black wearing masks. The person at the front suddenly came to the spot that Pu Yao had been standing and touched the ground with his hand. The patch of ground didn't seem different at all. "We're not wrong." The short words were filled with joy. But then he said in irritation, "It is a pity we're late." The crowd of black-clothed people shifted in response but no one spoke. This one has always been curious. "What are you searching for?" A light voice landed in the ears of this crowd of black-clothed people like lightning on a clear day. The expression of all those people changed as they turned quickly. A white-clothed Lin Qian raised his feet and, step by step, neared them. "Can you tell me, who the elder that was just here really is?" His expression was indifferent, but between his brows, the sword essence was thick. Chapter 79, Zhuo Mo's decision. Zhuo Mo opened his eyes and instantly let out a wail of pain. His body felt like someone had taken a short blade and scraped all over. It was excruciatingly painful. Was he at home? What time was it? Zhuo Mo struggled up while shaking his dizzy head. He had gone to Dong Fu, and bought a lot of things. His gaze landed on the 100 treasures pouch. Right, and then after that? He had gone to the free market. Zhuo Mo's pupils suddenly shrunk. He remembered. Yin beads. It was yin beads, those horrifyingly strong shouja. Zhuo Mo reflexively touched himself. Even though his entire body was in pain, he was completely unharmed and wasn't lacking any arms or legs. He was still alive. He remembered he had suddenly fainted. What happened after that? How did he return to the Little West Wind Yard? He didn't know. Did someone rescue him? This was the first idea that appeared in his head. Even though he didn't know much, but he wasn't dumb. The forest of signs in the free market was enough to make him realize the value of the yin bead was much larger than he had imagined. Those people would have no reason to let him free. He hurried to flip through his 100 treasures pouch. When he saw the yin beads were still there, he was even more confused. He took a count and found that there were 2 less. Whichever way he looked at it, it seemed strange. He suddenly realized he could ask Pu Yao. That guy definitely would know what had happened. When Zhuo Mo entered the sea of consciousness, he was instantly shocked. The furiously dancing sea of flames of the past was now withered, the flames extremely weak like the embers left after a fire and could extinguish at any time. The 2 stars were unchanged, hanging like diamonds in the void. The sword river didn't change either, same as usual, half of it icicles moving, half of it burning with water flames. Why would it be like this? Restraining the terror in his heart, Zhuo Mo started to sprint in the direction that Pu Yao was usually at. He had a strong feeling inside that something major had definitely happened. When he reached the stele and saw Pu Yao on top of the stele, he was dumbstruck. Pu Yao's face was without any color. He was like a statue as he sat, legs coiled, on the stele, motionless. Black clouds moved around his body. Pu! Xuemo tried to control the terror inside and called out. Pu Yao didn't respond. He was like a stone statue carved out of white marble. Xuemo called a few more times. Pu Yao didn't seem to hear it. Something definitely had happened. Xuemo forced himself to calm down. He carefully thought back to what happened that day. Beads. And then he connected it to Pu Yao's present state. What happened that day, it was obvious. In the eyes of high-level Xianxia, low-level Xianxia was like grass. When he had saw Shui Yun, he knew that he wouldn't be able to resolve it, and that was why he decided to go all in. People would kill for even a low-level talisman. How about the mysterious bead? Most of the beads he had were still present. That meant that those people hadn't got them. Had it really been Pu Yao who saved him? Xuemo almost couldn't believe it. Would Pu Yao be that kind? Yet this guess seemed to be the most reasonable one. As to Pu Yao's sorry state right now, Xuemo wasn't certain. Was he wounded? It seemed that it was quite serious. Even that time Pu Yao had been wounded by Xian Xianxia, he hadn't been this weak. Looking dazedly at Pu Yao, who was completely lifeless, Xuemo suddenly thought, would Pu Yao just die like this? But for some unknown reason, he pushed down the idea. This thought made him feel slightly terrified. Terrified that Pu Yao would disappear like this. Wasn't that what he had been hoping all this time? Looking at the lifeless Pu Yao, Xuemo's eyes became murky. He closed his eyes. A beat later, he opened them again. Gu wouldn't owe anyone. He was only paying back the other for saving his life, Xuemo told himself. For some unknown reason, when he made this decision, the terror inside suddenly stopped. Raising his head to glance at the statue-like Pu Yao, Xuemo took a deep breath. He started to think back to every detail of his interactions with Pu Yao, hoping to find a way to help him. The first thing he thought about was embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Pu Yao had been constantly tempting or forcing him to practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Xuemo remembered very clearly, it had been when he had broken through to one breath that the flame sea in his consciousness had become vigorous. Looking at the weak flames that were so weak now that it seemed as though they would extinguish at any time, Xuemo felt these crimson flames should have a very close relationship with Pu Yao. The second was Jingxia. Pu Yao always needed a lot of Jingxia. The great majority of Xuemo's Jingxia would end up in Pu Yao's hands. Xuemo had always been slightly amazed by the great appetite Pu Yao had towards Jingxia. Even though Xuemo didn't know where Pu Yao spent the Jingxia, but it was clear that Jingxia was very important to Pu Yao. Maybe it helped Pu Yao somehow. And then it was Yin energy. Xuemo could still see the picture of Pu Yao furiously taking in Yin energy on that trip to the Sword Cave. Xuemo felt that, for Pu Yao, Yin energy was something enriching and should help him. After a long time, Xuemo concluded these 3 points. In these 3, the most difficult was Yin energy. To take in Yin energy, that needed going into the Sword Cave. When Pu Yao was conscious, entering the Sword Cave was just a matter of Jingxia. But relying just on Xuemo, the difficulty of entering the Sword Cave was very high, and basically hopeless. Up until now, only Wei Xingxixiang had been allowed by the sect into the Sword Cave. For everyone else, even though Xuemo had comprehended the Li Water Sword essence and showed his talent, the elders in the sect didn't even mention it. Xuemo put his attention on the first 2 points. In his perspective, those 2 were more practical. He decided to go to the rock room to meditate and practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Just as he was preparing to leave, he saw from the mirror that he hadn't changed his appearance back. He hurriedly washed away the disguise on his face. If someone came in right now, that would be bad. It had been a very long time since Suemo had been so focused when he was practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Even though he still persisted in practicing it every day, but he didn't put much thought into it. Now that he really paid attention, he instantly found many places he was unclear about but had dismissed usually. He couldn't help but feel guilty and reflect on himself. It was like he had gone back to the time before he had broken through to one breath as he furiously started to study this cryptic and dull scripture. People were always like this. When they needed time, they would find that time was abnormally slippery. If one wasn't careful, it would slip away. Coming out of his meditation state, the sky was already dark. Suemo went to take a look at the sea of consciousness. The flames were still very weak and didn't seem to have visibly changed. It seemed that it needed a long-term effort, he thought inside. Leaving the consciousness, he started to sort out the ling herbs that he had bought in Dong Fu. These raw materials had been for him to experiment with the water method and to earn some jingsha. He hadn't thought that they would be useful so early. Before, Suemo had only wanted to experiment with making dan using the water method. But he was now abnormally serious. In his speculations, jingsha was one of the most important. He didn't know what help jingsha gave Puyao, but it was one of the few things he could do. Suemo couldn't help but grimace. It seemed that in his life, making jingsha was an eternal problem. Throwing away that thought, he started to follow the instructions on Elder Wei Nan's jade scrolls and prepare the ingredients. The water method and the fire method were as different as the earth and sky. It was the first time Suemo had come into contact with many of these things. But luckily, he had some dan-making experience now. Before, the experience of making so many golden crow pills had also given him a lot of experience. The language that Elder Wei Nan's jade scroll was written in was straight and clear, without any flourishes. It wasn't hard for Suemo to understand. This was also why Suemo would always feel his mind expand and be entrance when he browsed Elder Wei Nan's jade scrolls, yet when he read embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it was like his intestines were turned inside out and he felt that death would be welcome. Suemo studied the basic steps in the water method many times. Even though he wasn't totally familiar, he wasn't unfamiliar with it. The uniqueness of the water method laid in that it required making a dan embryo. The ling dan would be raised in the dan embryo. The process was like people during pregnancy, extremely miraculous. The most important step of the water method was to use spells and ling energy as channels, all kinds of materials and ling grasses as the flesh in order to form a dan embryo. It would not just directly decide whether a dan would form, but any little difference could cause the dan that would be formed to be completely different. This was one of the important reasons that the water method wasn't as popular as the fire method. It was even hard to grasp the patterns and trends involved. For Suemo, this was undoubted a new challenge. Luckily, his present cultivation was much higher than Elder Wei Nan when he had first tried the water method. The writings of Elder Wei Nan was extremely detailed. Many important parts, he had repeated and narrated it over. And Suemo had one advantage that Elder Wei Nan didn't have. Suemo had spiritual power. His consciousness, not just Elder Wei Nan, but the Shixiang in the sect wouldn't be as strong as him. The benefits of using his consciousness had been crucial when he had been using the fire method. Taking the ling grasses and herbs he had prepared, he went next to the ling spring in the rock room. The ling spring was extremely cold and was near the ling vein. After so many years, the ling energy in the spring was extremely dense. Along the way, Suemo inspected the ice cloud grass that was being grown in it. Seeing that its growth was very good, he put it to the side. Focusing, Suemo's hands was like snowflakes flying in the air. Some strangely shaped character seals that glowed slightly flew out of his hands and entered the ling spring. When those glowing character seals entered the ling spring, it was like there was a natural attraction between them and they slowly crowded together. Suemo stared with wide eyes unblinkingly, the speed of his hands not slowing down. As Suemo's finger motions changed, the glowing character seals in the Ling spring slowly moved. Like putting together puzzle pieces, the character seals slowly combined together. 2 whole hours, and Suemo was soaked in sweat, mist coming off his body. His eyes didn't dare to move away. With the finger motions that kept on changing, Suemo's fingers were extremely sore. But he could only grit his teeth and bear it. If he was the slightest bit lacking in attention, it meant that all his effort would be wasted. When the last glowing character seal went in, a steady, embryo frame took form. A light blue light suddenly appeared and flashed around the surface of the seal characters. Suemo didn't dare to hesitate. Without any time to wipe away the sweat, he used a specialized spell to add in the pre-prepared materials. A while later, a light blue spherical Dan embryo quietly floated in the Ling spring. Chapter 80, A Transformation on the Gravestone. 5 days of rest passed in the blink of an eye. Waiting for Xianxia's harsh training, Suemo accidentally found out that Shibua had left on other matters and his training would be temporarily halted. Without anything else to do, Suemo could only go to find Master, but strangely, she was also absent. He quickly discovered that the sect leader was not present, and neither was Yen Le Shibua. What had happened? Of course, Suemo didn't know that Pu Yao's exceptionally strong display completely shocked Sky Moon Jia. One encounter, 5 Jindan masters, 1 dead, 1 wounded, and 3 fled. Such terrifying strength, it was shocking to hear about. Jindan level Xiaoxia, in Sky Moon Jia they were high-level masters that could be ranked and counted, but they were so weak against that person. This incident also was connected to many sensitive matters. Bright Wave Jia quickly responded. Almost all the high-level Xiaoxia in Sky Moon Jia cooperated fully, and Wukong's sword sect naturally couldn't stay out of it. Even without Xianxia's supervision, Suemo didn't dare to relax. If he didn't practice Vajra Profound Sutra, the one who would suffer would be him. He decided to stay in the little West Wind Yard and focus on cultivating. Pu Yao was still a statue, motionless. The flames in the sea of consciousness were still very weak, as though they would extinguish at any time. Only a few days later did Suemo, from the sound tablet, learn that Dong Fu had almost been flipped on its head, and learn what Pu Yao really did. When he heard of the dark red flame, he knew undoubtedly that it was Pu Yao. This guy didn't even inform him before taking control of his body. Suemo felt hatred. And Pu Yao's glorious victory of 1 against 5 made his jaw drop. Stars in daylight, a strong and mysterious fire show, the long-lost bead. A string of complex incidents made Sky Moon Jia abnormally lively. But these didn't have much to do with Suemo now. Right now, he didn't dare to run out. If someone accidentally found out, he shuddered at this thought. He docilely stayed in the little yard, working hard on embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and Vajra Profound Sutra. Compared to profound and cryptic, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, Vajra Profound Sutra progressed much more quickly. Suemo could clearly feel his body was much stronger than before, even though he still looked thin and weak on the surface. There wasn't any movement from the Dan embryo in the Ling spring. Master's ban hadn't been raised, so he could not go to the Dan room of fragrant ginger yard to make Dan. But, all things considered, it was actually good. He could sort out and reflect on everything that happened recently. He hadn't had the time to look at the jade scroll that Liang Feng Shiji had given him before about Jinji. He could take the time now to study it. The Jinji in West Wind Valley needed to be constructed again. Otherwise, if the rock cave was accidentally discovered, it would be a huge blow to him. To learn Jinji, that required learning formations. Formations was something every cultivator had to learn. Forging, Dan making, seal writing etc. etc. All of those were related to formations. The disciples of the large sects would start learning formations in Lianqi in order to form a strong foundation for their road of cultivation. But for small sects, it was basically very hard to accomplish this, Wukong sword sect included. After experimenting for a few days, Sui Mo raised the Jinji again. After he just finished constructing the Jinji, he saw a pink paper crane flying out of the sky. Yi, I've been very bored recently. You need to find something to do. But I don't know what to find to do. What does you do every day? Cultivate. Cultivating every day, how boring must that be? Other than cultivation. What else does you do every day? Other than cultivation. Sui Mo was stuck. Other than cultivating, what else did he do? He thought for a second and then wrote, make Dan. Yi is so boring. Sui Mo suddenly was slightly irritated. Barely restraining the irritation, he wrote 3 words, yes, very boring. After a while, there finally wasn't any paper crane that was flying over. Sui Mo released a breath. It seemed the other person had been adequately blown away by his bland response. He returned to the stone room and started his boring cultivation. In the rock room, Sui Mo opened his eyes. His progress in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was extremely slow recently. It still seemed very far away from reaching third breath. He entered the sea of consciousness, wanting to check on Pu Yao. Pu Yao was still motionless like a statue. Sui Mo didn't know what to do. His own strength was extremely small. He wanted to help but had no method of helping. He was preparing to leave when he suddenly stopped in his steps. He abruptly turned and stared in disbelief at the gravestone under Pu Yao. There were words on the gravestone. There were words on the gravestone. Before, he could only barely make it out, but never had he seen it clearly. But this time, he saw it clearly. He hurriedly went closer, inspecting the words on the gravestone. But after a few seconds, he was struck dumb. What was written on the gravestone was none other than Vajra Profound Sutra. After practicing Vajra Profound Sutra, these recent days, he was extremely familiar with the entire scripture. After reading a few lines, he realized what it was. Why would Vajra Profound Sutra be on this? Sui Mo found it very strange. If it had been some cryptic and profound scripture carved on here, he wouldn't be shocked. Vajra Profound Sutra wasn't some high-level scripture. Sui Mo himself guessed that it would be 3rd grade. Such a mysterious gravestone having Vajra Profound Sutra on it really was a strange and puzzling thing. Pushing down on the curiosity inside, he read it down character by character. Quickly, he discovered something. This Vajra Profound Sutra was slightly different from the Vajra Profound Sutra that he was practicing right now. Some places, there were additions, some places, some things were changed. Was this the true Vajra Profound Sutra? Sui Mo couldn't understand. Vajra Profound Sutra wasn't a high-level scripture. Even if it was modified, it couldn't possibly become a high-level scripture. As he thought, Sui Mo smiled self-mockingly. He was really too greedy. For a long time, the gravestone had been mysterious in Sui Mo's eyes. He had unconsciously assumed that if this gravestone was connected to a scripture, it would certainly be a strong and profound scripture. So when he saw Vajra Profound Sutra on it, he was shocked. Thinking about it, he decided to memorize the Vajra Profound Sutra on the gravestone. When he finished memorizing the text, a scene that made him gape in shock occurred. The characters on the gravestone suddenly disappeared. The black clouds that had dissipated quietly gathered again and once again shrouded the gravestone. Was it, this gravestone was telling him that he was practicing Vajra Profound Sutra wrong? He shook his head hard and threw such the strange notion to the back of his head. In any case, it was normal for anything related to Pu Yao to be strange. Leaving the sea of consciousness, it was like Mo was enchanted as he started to study the two different Vajra Profound Sutra. The gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra was only different in 5 places from his previous version. Just 5 places. These 5 places, he studied for a long time, and made a very startling conclusion. The difference in these 5 sentences, it let this Vajra Profound Sutra walk onto 2 different roads. Other than shock, Mo felt it was expected. If there wasn't a difference, he would actually find it strange. But after a deeper examination, Mo was shocked once again. Because he found, the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra wasn't as good as the Vajra Profound Sutra that he was practicing. Mo was slightly unable to accept this conclusion. Pu Yao was an antique, but what he gave, like embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it could be seen it was a high-level thing. The gravestone that appeared together with him, how can it give a Vajra Profound Sutra that wasn't good as the normal version? Mo didn't believe it. He continued his examination. There wasn't much complex content in Vajra Profound Sutra. The main focus of the entire text was to cultivate the body. The method of the Vajra Profound Sutra, Mo practiced wasn't complicated. It was using the Ling energy inside the body to temper the body. And the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra was using the Ling energy that was in the world to nurture the body. Undoubtedly, the Vajra Profound Sutra that Mo was practicing was much more effective. Even in the rock room with the Ling vein, the Ling energy in the air was far from being able to compare to the pure Ling energy in Mo's body. Even more, strengthening was much more effective than nurturing. And the strength of the body that was produced by tempering was much better than a body that was nurtured. What was this? Mo felt that this was a joke. Was the gravestone joking with him? As he thought, he felt it was more and more likely. Otherwise, how would there be such a coincidence? He had just practiced Vajra Profound Sutra, and then the gravestone showed Vajra Profound Sutra. Was it that Pu Yao wasn't as seriously wounded as he thought and was toying with him? Or Pu Yao was lying under the gravestone already? With Pu Yao's sense of humor, Mo wouldn't be surprised if he didn't do anything strange and preposterous. Mo threw the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra to one side. Such an ineffective method, it was wasting time. But the change in the gravestone aroused Mo's attention. Every day, he would go into the sea of consciousness multiple times to see if the gravestone had any new changes. What he felt regretful about was, after that, the gravestone didn't change. A quiet gravestone, a quiet Pu Yao. Mo was slightly disappointed, but still persisted in practicing every day. But every time he would practice Vajra Profound Sutra, he would always unconsciously think about the 5 places that were different. Those 5 unfamiliar sentences were like a ghost haunting him, appearing in Mo's mind. Quite a few times, he had almost practiced the gravestone version but managed to stop himself. Time was valuable. He couldn't deliberately waste it, Mo thought. Practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation finally showed hope for Mo. He had almost completely disregarded the furious increase in his cultivation in the recent days. Looking at the slightly more vigorous flames in his consciousness, his mind lightened. It seemed he hadn't guessed wrong. He believed, as long as he persisted in practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, there would be a day that Pu Yao would wake up. In the recent days, all the elders of the sect were absent. Mo received a rare time of idleness. Each day, he cultivated and worked hard, time full and free. After a few days, the Ling Dan in the Ling Spring would be complete. Mo now had a deep experience of how slow the water method was. Suddenly, he heard someone yelling loudly outside the valley, "Swa-shi-xiang, Swa-shi-xiang." The voice was extremely frantic. Mo felt it was slightly unfamiliar. It should be one of the outer sect disciples. His body flashed and he appeared at the mouth of the valley. The heads of the outer sect disciples were pouring with sweat as they panted, expressions frantic. Seeing Zhuo, they instantly had a joyous expression. Xixiang. People have come to the sect to make a disturbance, and they wounded a few of the shitty. Chapter 81, Lingying Sect. When Zhuo rushed to the entrance of the mountain, he found the situation was much more serious than he had initially thought. Two distinct groups of people surrounded the mountain gate. Zhuo's gaze swept across the crowd of people that caused the disturbance. The ones who aroused Zhuo's attention was one female and two males. The clothing and composure of those three were clearly different than the people behind them. When Zhuo saw Old Black had been wounded, the anger in his heart shot up. In a stride, his body flashed and he appeared next to Old Black. Blood was seeping out of the corners of Old Black's mouth, his expression was withered. When he saw Zhuo, joy made its way across his face. What happened? Zhuo asked in a heavy voice. The spirits of the Wukong sword sect's disciples rose when Zhuo appeared. Oh, finally, there's one that is willing to stand up, one of the two males among the trio who was wearing a grandiose blue Ling armor said in a strange tone. I had assumed that the inner sect disciples of Wukong sword sect are a group of turtles. Hey, kid, give us your name. Where's Wei Sheng, why hasn't he come out? Zhuo didn't pay attention to him, only looking at Old Black. Old Black's face was full of bitterness. They said they wanted to find Wei Sheng Xixiang to spar, but how can Wei Sheng come out? So they started making a ruckus. They said if Wei Sheng Xixiang isn't going to come out, they would ruin the Ling fields here. Think about it, how could I let them ruin my Ling fields? Zhuo took out a medicine pill from his clothes and shoved it to Old Black. He was a pupil of Shi Feng Rong, at the very least, he didn't lack medicine. The surrounding disciples all had admiring expressions. Putting Old Black into the care of the outer sect disciples behind him, Zhuo turned around. So it's a zombie face. Hey, you're that Zhuo, the male wearing the blue Ling armor arrogantly waved a finger and said, I heard that you are skilled at making Dan. You won't be enough, go find Wei Sheng. The first genius of Dong Fu, hiding. He really isn't anything. Isn't there also someone that was called something like Luo Li? Which sect are you from? Zhuo calmly asked. We are from the Lingying sect. The one who answered was the only female among the three. She wore pink peach blossom armor. Her body was extremely graceful, sweet and youthful, lights flashing in her eyes. Almost all of the gazes of Wukong sword sect's outer sect disciples were greedily locked on her. She wasn't embarrassed, instead she was covered in smiles. Zhuo had heard of the Lingying sect before, it was the wealthiest sect in Dongfu. The sect had numerous enterprises, and the disciples they admitted were mostly those of wealthy families. Unlike Wukong sword sect, they had an astounding number of disciples. Just the number of Zhuji disciples in Lingying sect was over 80 people. This number threw Wukong sword sect far behind them. They were first among Dongfu. However, the reputation of the Zhuji disciples of Lingying sect were extremely bad. What they liked to do the most was causing trouble. Many of them had a strong family background and would cause trouble in other sects, yet the other sects could only bear it. They formed groups and made trouble everywhere. Because they consumed Ling medicines from childhood, the progression of their cultivation was much faster than normal disciples. And because they were covered in talismans, if fighting occurred and they threw it down, how could normal disciples win? And if the other was stronger than them, then they would attack at once. After a while, lower-level Xiuzha would walk around them. But they were also smart and would never provoke those truly strong people such as Yubai. They had heard that a strong person had come out of Wukong sword sect called Wei Sheng. He had been labeled by many as a once-in-100-years genius. They naturally wouldn't dare to cause trouble at large sects such as Dong Fu Hall and Dong Chi Sword Sect. But this Wukong Sword Sect, they had never heard of it before. A small sect like this, they weren't afraid at all. Due to the fact that Dong Fu had been very lively this recent while, the elders of all the sects had almost all left. Such a good chance, how could they give it up? Before coming, they had especially done research. In this generation of Wukong Sword Sect disciples, the most famous was two people. The first was Wei Sheng, the second was Sui Mo, who was skilled in dan making. But no one had ever seen how strong Wei Sheng was. This made them even more certain that Wei Sheng only had an inflated reputation. As to Sui Mo, a dan maker, what waves could he make? Other than that, there was someone called Luo Li, but he was supposedly average. There were three people, the one wearing the blue Ling armor was called Yan Mingzi. The other wearing an eye-catching bright red Ling armor was called Hu Shan. The name of the female wearing the pink peach blossom Ling armor was called Tao Zhuer. Oh, Mo expressionlessly responded. He then turned to ask Old Black, who wounded you? There's no need to ask, ye did it, Yan Mingzi said disdainfully, you should go get Wei Sheng to come out. You only make Dan, Yi is almost embarrassed, the voice suddenly stopped. Yan Mingzi stared with slight shock at Sui Mo. In his eyes, this little zombie in front of him seemed to suddenly change into a completely different person. That feeling, it was like a sword that was now unsheathed. It wasn't the first time that Yan Mingzi fought and caused trouble. He was very experienced. He dropped his mirthful expression, and said somewhat seriously, hadn't thought that I would not see clearly. You are actually a master. The other two were also surprised. The presence Sui Mo exuded definitely didn't seem like a cultivator who was obsessed with dan making would have. But the two weren't very worried. They had hung out on the streets for this long and the number of hard bones they had encountered couldn't be counted. Many people were more powerful than them, but weren't they all defeated in the end? Even more, this little zombie had lower cultivation than them. Sui Mo didn't waste words and raised his ice crystal sword. Ha! You are really poor. Yan Mingzi roared with laughter and said with a smug face, take a look at Ye's flying sword. The sword was 3 feet, shaped like an elongated water droplet. The body of the sword was like the surface of a pond, dark and the bottom unfathomable. Occasionally, a streak of light would flash past and display the extravagance. The sword's name is Water Drop, 3rd grade, and the highest quality of water element flying sword. He examined Sui Mo and shook his head, everything on your body isn't even worth a fraction of this flying sword. Sui Mo completely lost the desire to converse with the other. Without another word, he attacked first. Flowing water, of Li Water Sword Scripture. An invisible ripple spread out in front of Sui Mo. The ice crystal sword seemed to disappear and then appeared out of nowhere in front of Yan Mingzi. Yan Mingzi only seemed to see a blur before the other's flying sword suddenly was in front of him. The sword essence contained in the tip of the sword was so sharp he almost couldn't keep his eyes open. He jumped in fright. He hurriedly manipulated his flying sword to parry. The other's flying sword seemed abnormal slippery and with a smooth curve, it nimbly avoided his flying sword and came straight at him. Yan Mingzi was in a panic but his battle experience was much richer. He knew that the other's flying sword wasn't as good as his and decided to go for a frontal encounter. Sui Mo snorted coldly. It might have been that he had interacted for too long with Pu Yao that his snort was very similar. He knew what the other was thinking. However, the quality of his ice crystal sword was far lesser than the other. If the two hit, the one who would suffer would be him. He only had this flying sword. If it was damaged here, the sect definitely wouldn't give him another one for free. But Sui Mo's skill with Li Water Sword Scripture was far better than in the past. The teachings of Xian Yen Shibwa had covered many of his shortcomings. The holy water sword scripture that he casted now was smooth and flowing, almost traceless. The sword scripture that the other used was also abnormally special, but it was clear that the other hadn't focused on practicing it. He wasn't able to capture the essence of many of the details. Based on the details, the other's sword scripture was slightly above Li water sword scripture. Xuemo couldn't help but shake his head. Such a good sword scripture, but the other didn't know to treasure it. He was also extremely tempted by the other's flying sword. In comparison, his ice crystal sword was extremely cheap. In reality, what Xuemo minded the most was the other's water drop sword was just perfect for Li water sword scripture. His ice crystal sword was appropriate for Xi and Xianxia's sword essence but wasn't suited for Li water sword scripture. Xuemo had been thinking for a long time about obtaining a flying sword suited for Li water sword scripture. His heart moved and he couldn't help but have an idea. The ice crystal sword became even harder to follow. His sword moves still followed the path of entangling and intricacies. But in all of this, there was a slight hint of explosiveness, and was full of murderous intent. This little bit of explosiveness caused Yan Mingzi to feel the pressure had increased greatly. This dissonant feeling made him extremely uncomfortable. Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer's faces were full of surprise. Yan Mingzi was in a disadvantageous position. They had to re-examine Xuemo. This Xuemo is pretty strong. Tao Zhuer's voice held surprise, different than the rumors. Didn't they say he was skilled in dan making? The information on Wukong's sword sect is already very pitifully little. How could we have researched that clearly? Hu Shan said unconcernedly. Even though he was surprised, but he was only just surprised. If Xuemo could have this kind of strength, then how strong would Wei Xing be? Tao Zhuer wondered. Hu Shan smirked, it doesn't matter how strong they are. They have become too well known recently. Many of the Xixiang and Shiji have noticed them. Supposedly, the Shishu also do not have good feelings about Wukong's sword sect. Tao Zhuer smiled, yes, Dong Fu is only this big. A new one that is coming to divide it, how could the miserly Shishu of the sect be willing? Hu Shan said indifferently, in any case, it isn't our problem. But I heard that their elders are pretty strong. They're strong, but are they as strong as Jingshi? Tao Zhuer gave a light laugh. Huh, right. Hu Shan laughed. As the two talked, the battle situation changed. Yan Mingzi suddenly didn't dodge anymore. The ice crystal sword pierced his Ling armor. It gave a clear ring but didn't leave a mark on the Ling arm. Xuemo couldn't help but pause. During his period of distraction, Yan Mingzi's water drop sword suddenly attacked. It was like an icy water sword. Xuemo hurriedly turned his body. He felt a gust of coldness brush past his arm. Ha! Just a second-grade flying sword, how can it break through my black water Ling armor? Yan Mingzi laughed smugly, his sword presence become even more bold. Tao Zhuer didn't seem surprised at the scene occurring and felt it was boring. She couldn't help but say, only knowing to use status to bully others, it's so boring. As she talked, she organized the petals on her peach blossom Ling armor. A smirk was on Hu Shan's face as he watched the ice crystal sword strike Yan Mingzi's Ling armor again. It was useless, don't you understand? If you want to blame someone, just blame it on the fact you weren't born into a good family. He looked with some sympathy at Xuemo. Yan Mingzi didn't seem to have any hint of dodging. He was very confident in the Ling armor he was wearing. But when the soft and weak ice crystal sword just touched the black water Ling armor, a change suddenly happened. Chapter 82, If people don't get ill-gotten gains, they won't be rich. A burst of dense sword essence flowed into the Ling armor and silently snuck into Yan Mingzi's body. Yan Mingzi only felt an extremely cold needle suddenly burrow into his body. His body instantly froze. Light flashed in Zhuo Mo's eyes as he found the opportunity he had been waiting for. With a short bark, he started, Vajra Profound Sutra, silently. A faint layer of gold suddenly floated on his sky. His legs suddenly pushed and like an arrow, his body shot out. Yan Mingzi's expression suddenly changed. But his body was still frozen. What spell was this? Zhuo Mo's goal wasn't Yan Mingzi but the now uncontrolled water drop sword that was floating midair. It really was a good sword. The gold glowing right hand grasped the handle of the water drop sword and the Ling energy inside his body flooded inside the water drop sword. As expected, joy made its way inside Zhuo Mo's heart. The other hadn't put much effort into imprinting the sword. The bit of consciousness inside the water drop sword was pitifully weak. Zhuo Mo easily erased it. The water drop sword shook 2 times in Zhuo Mo's hand before becoming motionless. It took a lot of time and countless effort to slowly imprint a flying sword before it would be easily controlled, and also, to not be easily stolen by others. Some strong people would construct layers of Jinji inside the sword. If a person would try to steal the sword like Zhuo Mo did, they would be wounded instead. But Zhuo Mo had guessed that this person wouldn't spend a lot of time imprinting the flying sword. He had guessed correctly. This change occurred very quickly, so quickly everyone gaped, the surroundings deadly silent. Yan Mingzi was dumbstruck. He had never thought that the other person was targeting his water drop sword. When he felt the connection he had to the water drop sword disappear, his expression changed dramatically. Zhuo Mo contently put the water drop sword in the 100 treasures pouch at his waist. His mood was great. He assumed a proper composure as he said to Yan Mingzi, "This sword, it will count as the price you pay for offending our sect. Next time, don't do something as silly as this." What he had just used was the tidal sword essence of Xian Yen Shibua, extremely yin and extremely cold. Without any defenses, Yan Mingzi had taken a huge blow. Yan Mingzi's fingers shook as he pointed at Zhuo Mo, his face pale, so angry he couldn't talk. But he didn't have the water drop sword anymore and couldn't do anything to Zhuo Mo, This is so funny. Hu Shan laughed heartlessly, covering his stomach. He was laughing so hard he almost couldn't breathe. Old Yan, it's so funny. Even your sword was stolen, Old Yan, you're definitely the first in our sect. He. Brother Yan, you're too amusing. Tao Zhuer laughed, looking like a flower and unable to stop. Yan Mingzi didn't know what to say. But when he saw Zhuo Mo's eyes sweep across the Ling armor on his body over and over, his heart jumped and he hurried back a few steps. He had lost in a muddle. Even now, he didn't understand why he had suddenly froze. What spell had the other used? Today, he really had been humiliated. Yan Mingzi's heart bled blood. The sound of Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer's laughter was abnormally dissonant. He had lost great face. Even if they would defeat Zhuo Mo together and he would take back the water drop sword, when they returned, Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer would certainly spread this incident far and wide. If the sword was lost, then it was lost. But if this incident passed back to the sect, he wouldn't be able to keep his head up ever again. He wasn't someone kind. He was angrier at Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer than at Zhuo Mo. He was very shocked at Zhuo Mo's skills. He couldn't understand it all. He looked at the 2 people who were bent over in laughter and smirked inside. Those 2 definitely wouldn't have detected what had happened. The paralysis just now, it was completely silent, without a hint of warning. After thinking it through, he calmed down. He purposefully said in an enraged voice, "Hu Shan, haven't you been yearning for my blue 3-eyed python? If you take back water drop sword for me, I'll give it to you." Hu Shan didn't laugh anymore. He tilted his head, and seriously looked at Yan Mingzi, "Really?" Yan Mingzi smirked inside. On the surface, he nodded rapidly, of course, with Tao Zhuer as witness, will I not pay up? Okay. Hu Shan's face was happy as he sniffed, old Yen, you couldn't even beat trash like this, you have really deteriorated. You have to practice more. Otherwise, when I bring you out to make trouble, wouldn't you lose the face of our Lingying sect? Yan Mingzi hated Hu Shan for saying such ugly words. Inside, he hoped for Zuo to turn Hu Shan to minced meat. His mouth went, wait until you get water drop sword back before you waste words. Hu Shan took a step out and smiled widely at Zuo, you're an interesting guy. If you obediently give up the water drop sword, I'll let you go once. The meat that reached his mouth, there wasn't a reason to spit it out. Zuo was too lazy to respond it to him. He examined Hu Shan. He suddenly discovered this was a glittering golden road to becoming rich. That water drop sword, it was extremely expensive. Don't think that Zuo had more money after learning to make Dan, but if this water drop sword was in the talisman stores of Dongfu, Zuo could only look at it. He definitely couldn't afford it. Now, it had landed in his wallet. If he converted it to Jingshi. He suddenly realized, what was faster than taking something? What was more enjoyable than justifiably stealing something? Zuo reached out with a hand. The ice crystal sword once again came in front of him. He said in a righteous voice, you dare to bully us Wukong. One-on-one, your Lingying sect, GE really isn't afraid. The disciples behind Zuo looked with admiration at him. As expected, when he provoked them, Hu Shan's expression wasn't happy, humph, the bottom of the barrel and really think you are something. I had originally thought to let you off, but since you didn't realize, a dash of silver light flashed in the air and landed in front of Hu Shan. Coward. Dare to use an ambush. Hu Shan was both shocked and angry. A blazing saber appeared in his hand. Flames danced wildly along the long blade of the saber, burning fiercely. Even far away, Zuo felt the incoming heat. It was another good talisman. Zuo's eyes turned red. This blazing saber, it definitely was the highest quality of the third grade and wasn't lower than the water drop sword he had just taken. He hurriedly moved the ice crystal sword away. Water and fire opposed each other and depended on which was stronger. Zuo was certain that if he wasn't careful and was trapped by the other's flame, the ice crystal sword would probably melt into a puddle of water. He had heard before that the scriptures of Lingying sect was extremely broad. He hadn't thought that they would have something as rare as a saber scripture. The great majority of the sects in Sky Moon Jia were based primarily on cultivating the sword. It was very rare to find Xiuzha that practiced the saber. The other's blazing saber carelessly swiped, and there would be a burst of hot flame and air that opposed him. The road that, Li Water Sword Scripture, walked was the one of lightness and careful intricacies. However, the difference between the two talismans was too great. The ice crystal sword basically couldn't go near the other and so the sword scripture naturally wasn't effective. The Ling armor on the other's body was also unordinary. Red light flashed, and made Hu Shan look like a god in a mortal world. Ha ha! Weren't you acting brave just now? Be brave! Hu Shan laughed, extremely pleased. The saber presence on his hand roiled and waves of flames chased after Zuo as he jumped and dodged. Shock was on the faces of all the Wukong sword sect disciples and they all retreated. The fire wave from Hu Shan's blazing saber was extremely hot. Everywhere it went, it left behind scorch marks. As they said, people died for wealth, birds died for food. Zuo tragically thought as his brain calculated rapidly. The other saber scripture was clearly less than Yan Mingzi's sword scripture, but in cooperation with this high-quality blazing saber, the power was astounding. Good saber, good saber. Zuo's eyes was so red fire could shoot out as he made a sorry figure dodging about. The other's saber presence wasn't fierce enough. Otherwise, the fire waves could continuously come and Mo wouldn't be able to avoid it. It wasn't that Mo didn't have a solution, but that solution. Gritting his teeth, he decided to go through with it. But, even if he was going all in, he had to earn back his cost. As he jumped and dodged, his eyes scanned the other's body, looking for a target. When his eyes landed on the jade pendant that was hanging from the other's waist, his eyes couldn't help but light up. Good talisman. The jade pendant was of an old style of construction, the entire body constructed by a kind of red jade. There wasn't any impurities in the red. A black bead was encrusted in the middle. There were a few formations carved on the jade pendant. Mo recognized one of them. It was called a streaming fire core management formation. This was a formation that could increase the wearer's sensitivity to fire, and also increase their control over fire. The streaming fire core management formation was extremely useful. For low-level Xianxia, it was something out of their dreams. However, the requirements for making the streaming fire core management formation were extremely strict. Mo couldn't bear to use it on a regular basis. This jade pendant was able to have a streaming fire core management formation, its quality wasn't ordinary. Mo deeply realized a phrase, when the profit was large enough, it was enough for people to risk it. All in. Mo made the decision and quickly calmed down. He needed to find a chance to knock out his opponent in one blow. The waves of fire turned. The flames on the body of the saber didn't seem as though they would become weaker. Hu Shan was completely protected by layers of flames. Mo couldn't get near. Mo was extremely sneaky. The waves of fire didn't even touch his hair. Hu Shan became slightly fidgety and the saber presence was even more rushed. This group of people, they really were wasting good things. Mo's heart was full of scorn. Such a good saber, landing in the hands of these people, it was a pearl in the hands of swine. The other's saber presence sped up. It seemed more dangerous but Mo could detect it that the other wasn't able to control all of it. After Mo had comprehended Xianxia's tidal sword essence, his perception of presence had become extremely sensitive. Due to his long-term practice of comprehending Li water sword essence, it had deepened his understanding of presence. It was the same rationale for sword and saber essence. What they were after was strength used appropriately. It wasn't the energy used was more, the presence stronger, and so the power would always be greater. This was a chance. Mo's pupils suddenly shrunk. He accurately caught the other's minor weakness. Having waited for a long time, he instantly acted. The ice crystal sword that had been swimming beside him like a fish gave out a light sound. Traveling along the spot where the layers of fire were the thinnest, it pushed in strongly. Halfway, the ice crystal sword turned into an extremely cold stream of water. This wasn't due to being melted by the fire but the result of Mo actively and furiously pushing Ling energy in, metamorphosis. Metamorphosis was an upper-level trick of sword scriptures. Xianxia's ice dragon was a high-level metamorphosis of his sword. Mo's power right now wasn't enough for metamorphosis. Just having touched sword essence, he could only use the dumbest and the simplest way. That was, putting large amounts of Ling energy into the flying sword, pushing it to turn back to its original form and stimulating the power of its origins. It could only count as the lowest type of metamorphosis. Basically, no one would use this kind of metamorphosis, because after doing it, the flying sword was ruined. This was also why Mo had hesitated for so long. But after balancing the benefits and costs, he still decided to use this move. After making the decision, he didn't have any hesitations, no pauses. He had been preparing for a long time, acting it out repeatedly inside. How could he not have any chance of success? The ice crystal sword, now a stream of cold water, pushed through the layers of fire as its power increased. The cold energy was enough to freeze the surrounding flames. Hu Shan's face paled. He furiously moved the blazing sword, waves of fire continuously forming in hopes that they would block this extremely cold water. However, Zuemo had planned for such a long time, had even paid the price of ruining the ice crystal sword. How could he stop there? Chapter 83, Brute Force. Just as Hu Shan was furiously waving the blazing saber, the cold water that had pierced the flames suddenly exploded, turning into 7 streams and landing around Hu Shan. The 7 streams were thin, filled with a white cold energy. They revolved rapidly, hissing as they moved. 7 whirlpools. 7 bunches of cold energy and sword energy formed whirlpools. They were like the pillars of a cage, imprisoning Hu Shan. The whirlpools were moving shocking fast, like a miniature tornado. It had a strong suction power. Everywhere it went, the layers of flames were consumed so nothing was left. Shock appeared on Tao Zhuer and Yan Mingzi's faces as they stared in disbelief at the battle. The other sect disciples who were behind Zuemo were extremely excited and were intoxicated by the fight. Terror made its way onto Hu Shan's face. Surrounding him, 7 groups of water and fire entwined to become long whirlpools. They were like 7 thin pillars that securely trapped him. The bang and hiss of water and fire meeting signaled just how unstable it was and expressed the terrifying power that was in them. No! Hu Shan shouted in hopelessness, his left hand quickly going into the 100 treasures pouch at his waist. Boom! The 7 fire and water whirlpools exploded at the same time. The pitiful Hu Shan, who just had taken out an armor seal, was swallowed by countless flames and tiny icicles. The explosion dissipated, leaving behind smoke which faded as people made out Hu Shan's state. That grandiose red Ling armor was now dim and dirty, a layer of ash over the top. There were many small marks on the surface of the Ling armor. Hu Shan's tied-up hair had been blown into a bird's nest, his face ashy and black. Some strands of lingering smoke rose up from his face and head. The flame had completely disappeared from the blazing saber on his hand, nothing remaining of the presence it previously had. His right hand holding the bottom half of an armor seal that he didn't have the time to use. His entire person was charred like burnt wood. The jade pendant actually hadn't been damaged at all. Zuemo released a breath. He silently started Vajra Profound Sutra, and cautiously walked in front of Hu Shan. Glancing at Hu Shan and seeing that the other didn't seem to have responded, Zuemo wasn't courteous as taking off the red jade pendant at Hu Shan's face. After taking it, he looked with some regret at the blazing saber on Hu Shan's hand and the Ling armor on his body. Those 2 were also good things. However, Zuemo knew that people couldn't go over the line. Right now, he took the jade pendant. That was his prize for winning. It wasn't outrageous. However, if he cleaned off the other person, then he could just wait for them to come back and kill him. Also, Zuemo didn't let down his defenses. His left hand had always been inside his own 100 treasure pouch, touching the water drop sword that he had just obtained. He hurriedly left behind his own imprint. Even though, in this short amount of time, he couldn't imprint the sword and could only leave behind the simplest impression, but the ice crystal sword had been destroyed and he had no weapon. The other was also not just one person. Ha ha! Yan Mingzi saw that Zuemo had taken Hu Shan's jade pendant and couldn't stop himself from laughing smugly. He was very clear just how much Hu Shan treasured his jade pendant. Seeing Hu Shan had lost more than time, his damage even greater, Yan Mingzi recovered his sense of equilibrium. He didn't seem to find it so painful anymore at losing the water drop sword. Looking at Hu Shan's sorry state, Tao Zhuer also couldn't stop herself from giggling. But her eyes as she looked at Zuemo had some more shock and curiosity. Hu Shan slowly came back. Seeing Zuemo right in front of him, hatred rose, and with a hateful shout, raised the saber to cleave the other in half. Mo, who had already had his defenses up, attacked even more quickly. Like lightning, he reached out with his gold-glowing right hand, and accurately grabbed Hu Shan's neck. Then he gave a hard pull. Crack! A muffled sound like a head hitting a rock. Hiss! The sound of inhales rose in the surroundings. Everyone looked dazedly at Mo. Their mouths were wide. They had completely lost the ability to speak. Still a little bit painful. Mo bared his teeth and then threw the unconscious Hu Shan on the ground. His right hand rubbed hard at his forehead. His forehead was perfectly unharmed, and on Hu Shan's forehead, a bloody flower was blooming. How hard would he need to be before a flying sword couldn't wound him? Mo thought as he rubbed his glittering forehead. But he was quite satisfied. He hadn't wasted the pain and effort he put into training his body. Still want to fight? He asked Tao Zhu'er. In reality, when he asked this, he was not very confident. But his zombie face that could not show any emotion was like that of a skilled master. Additionally, Tao Zhu'er had completely been amazed by Mo's abnormal attack. At this time, she didn't know what to answer with. If you don't want to fight, take him away. Gu is very busy. Mo took the opportunity to stop the other's words. He waved his hand, turned and made to leave. Wait! Tao Zhu'er suddenly called him. Mo's heart jumped. Did she still want to fight? Right now, his flying sword had been destroyed. If he wanted to control the water drop sword as he wished, it couldn't be done in such a short amount of time as this. He had also used up the majority of Ling energy in his body. What else do you want? He turned and pretended to ask discontentedly. Wukong's sword sect, as expected, is strong. But since you have put down a challenge of one-on-one, us Lingying sect disciples will naturally battle to the end. In the future when we ask for guidance, please do not avoid. Tao Zhu'er stared at Mo and stated. She had to admit they had been caught off guard today and lost to the other. But Mo's expression, which looked as though he didn't think anything of them, how could these arrogant and brash wastrels swallow it? However, if she had to go up, she didn't dare to. This person in front of her, she couldn't seem to see him clearly. Especially Mo's last head attack. Humph, such a fun thing, how can it be just the three of them that played? Tao Zhu'er thought cunningly. She believed that many people in the sect would be interested. At this time, Mo couldn't wait for those people to leave immediately. He didn't even think, waved his hand to send them away. Fine. Finishing, he turned around. With the admiring gazes of the outer sect disciples behind him, he floated away. This time, he didn't hear Tao Zhu'er speak again. Mo finally released a breath. Tao Zhu'er bit her lips. She had never been dismissed like this, had never been hurried away like this. Sometimes, the hatred of a woman would germinate from a very small detail. Just wait. She thought hatefully. Mo returned to the little west wind yard and caressed the two talismans he took. They were really good things. The more he looked, the more he liked it. He really profited today. As to the consequences, they were completely thrown to the back of his head. In his mind, these two fine third-grade talismans, they were worth anything. After recovering his Ling energy in the stone room, Mo started to imprint the water drop sword. As he carried out the imprinting, he discovered that the water drop sword lived up to being the finest among the third-grade flying swords. The body of the water drop sword was extremely soft and could curve in any direction. It also contained an extremely large amount of black water. In reality, it was a water sword. The Ling energy could reach every part of the sword, and due to its softness, Mo was able to, through manipulating Ling energy, change the shape of the flying sword. It was as though it had been custom-made for Li Water Sword Scripture. From the time he got it, other than imprinting it, Zhuo Mo put it in the Ling spring in the rock Rome. The Ling energy of the Ling spring was lively and rich. To put it in there and slowly nurture it, it was especially helpful for increasing the nimbleness of the water drop sword. As for the jade pendant, Zhuo Mo wore it every day. He finally understood the formations on the jade pendant. The jade pendant had 3 formations. Other than flowing fire core management formation, there was also clear heart incantation and Ling gathering formation. Nothing needed to be said more about streaming fire core management formation. Clear heart incantation nurtured the mind, and Ling gathering formation could gather the Ling energy in the surroundings and was very practical. If Zhuo Mo didn't have the Ling vein in the rock room, Ling gathering formation would definitely be one of the formations he wanted to get the most. The Ling gathering formation on the jade pendant was just the most basic Ling gathering formation, but the effects were extremely evident. When Zhuo Mo wore the jade pendant as he meditated in the rock room, the efficiency would increase by 1/10. Don't underestimate the 1/10. Accumulating over time, the gap it caused was extremely large. Ling gathering formations were one of the most well-studied formations. At the same time, it was also called the formation that was created through Jingshi. It consumed large amounts of Jingshi. So for the simpler, Ling gathering formation, it wasn't as practical as taking Ling energy from the Jingshi. But if it had to be constructed on the jade pendant, other than needing the forger to be knowledgeable about the Ling gathering formation, but the material it was constructed on had to be able to gather Ling energy already. Materials that could gather Ling energy as one of its attributes, all of them were extremely expensive. On this jade pendant, the most valuable was this nondescript, Ling gathering formation. It was even more valuable than the streaming fire core management formation. Just this, Ling gathering formation, it was enough to elevate this jade pendant into 3rd grade. It was a pity that he couldn't make Dan right now. Otherwise, he really wanted to try out the effects of the streaming fire core management formation. Zhuo Mo probably wouldn't have thought the incident of him defeating the troublemakers of Lingying's sect would have more of an effect with the outer sect disciples than his battle with Luo Li in the sect assessment. For outer sect disciples, the person who was stronger would make them respect him, but the Shixiang who was willing to protect them and their profits, he would be more loved by them. This battle, Zhuo Mo had received great experience. Actually, based on cultivation, he didn't have much of a difference than Hu Shan and Yan Mingzi. He was even slightly weaker than them. The reason that he could win came from the fact that he had comprehended sword essence. Regardless of whether it was Xian Yan Shibua's tidal sword essence or the Li Water sword essence, his understanding of the sword scripture, of presence, far surpassed the others. Combined with the others' underestimation of him, that was how he had so easily won. Otherwise, the person who would have lost would have probably been him, especially if Hu Shan had used the armor seal just a step earlier. Thinking about it, Zhuo Mo couldn't help but rage. Was this group of people fighting? They were just throwing Jingshi. He pretty much was drooling at the grandiose talismans. They could carelessly use things like an armor seal. He felt pain on their behalf. Squanderer. They were truly squandering everything. What also caught Zhuo Mo's attention was Vajra Profound Sutra. No matter if it was against Yan Mingzi or Hu Shan, Vajra Profound Sutra had been very effective and pivotal in battle. It seemed that he had to put more time into Vajra Profound Sutra. This thing wouldn't just save his life. It seemed to have other effects as well. But when he thought about Vajra Profound Sutra, he remembered the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra. The 5 bits that had been modified haunted his mind and would pop up occasionally. Especially when he was practicing Vajra Profound Sutra, he couldn't stop himself from thinking about the 5 different parts. It drastically impacted the efficiency of his practice. Why don't I try it? Suemo thought hesitantly. Chapter 84, for Jingshi looking at the dark gold skin covering his entire body, Suemo couldn't help but give a pinch. As expected, the mechanism of the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra, and the Vajra Profound Sutra, that he had practiced before were completely different. With the previous version of Vajra Profound Sutra, his skin had glowed with a bright gold shine. Right now, his skin was dark gold. The bright gold skin had been as hard as steel when pinched, while the dark gold skin was like a metallic leather, softness within the hardness. The Ling gathering formation on the jade pendant had been of great benefit to Suemo. It caused the density of Ling energy in the surroundings to increase significantly, and was very beneficial for practicing the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra. Feeling the difference between the two, Suemo decided to practice the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra for a longer length of time before examining the differences. He had a feeling that the mysterious gravestone wasn't so simple. In his sea of consciousness, Puyao was still motionless. The gravestone was also deadly silent, and the flames were weak. However, what kept most of Suemo's attention recently was the Ling Dan in the Ling Spring, which was almost completely formed. This moisture Dan was the first time Suemo had tried Dan making using the water method. Naturally, he was slightly nervous. Luckily, nothing unexpected had happened during the process. The moisture Dan was successfully made. He carefully examined the moisture Dan. The Ling Dan was like a pink pearl, extremely adorable. This moisture Dan, it was the Ling Dan of countless women's dreams. Suemo had asked about the price. A first-grade moisture Dan like the one in his hand, one of them was worth 1/3 grade Jingshi. This price far surpassed many normal first-grade Ling Dan. However, this time wasn't the best opportunity to sell the moisture Dan. He was still afraid when he thought about what occurred with the Yin bead. He guessed that this fear wouldn't be disappearing anytime soon. It was hard for this terror to be shaken off. Considering how loud the incident in Dongfu had been, he was worried that some people would have tracked the purchases he had made. It would be very dangerous to sell the moisture Dan right now. His own strength was still very weak. In any case, making the moisture Dan was practice. Dan making was a topic of study that required large amounts of practical experience. The sound tablet was continuously broadcasting the news of Sky Moon Jia. The incident of Dongfu had ended. There was news that the Shouja from Bright Wave Jia were gradually leaving because they had investigated for a while and hadn't found any traces. In this recent period, several fierce conflicts had occurred in the surroundings of Dongfu, and the mortality rate had been extremely high. After those sudden conflicts, the chaos of Dongfu finally calmed down. Suemo couldn't help thinking that there was something going on behind the scenes. However, it was clearly not something a Zhuji cultivator like him could understand. Listening to the sound tablet, other than it being a habit, he paid close attention to the changes in the prices of goods. Recently, the price of all kinds of ling grasses and herbs on the market had been constantly increasing. This had caused the price of all lingdan to increase as well. Before, Suemo certainly would have been very happy. This was the time that ling plant farmers could show their value. As a ling plant farmer, his advantages in the area of ling plant farming was extremely visible, especially after he entered Juji. Right now, as one person, the ling fields that he could take care of were more than the total of 20 outer sect disciples. Additionally, the two were not even on the same level when it came to output. On the other hand, he could pursue more attention-intensive farming and plant ling plants of higher grades. However, the reality was, no matter in which area, he was stuck in a very awkward position. First was the ling fields. Wukong Sword sect did not have many low-grade ling fields and had basically been divided by the outer sect disciples. If Suemo wanted to rent them, it required squeezing out many outer sect disciples. Having deeply experienced the harsh life of an outer sect disciple, Zhuo Mo was naturally unwilling to do that. And all the Ling fields of slightly higher grades, the sect had given to fragrant ginger yard. Could Zhuo Mo try to take Ling fields from the hands of his master? 20 mu of third-grade Ling fields. In the past, Zhuo Mo would have felt that it was a lot, but right now, he felt that there wasn't enough. Yet there were just these many Ling fields in the sect. There was no way around it. Wukong Sword Sect wasn't a sect that was famous for its farming. Pei Yuanran and the others had never thought that the sect would have a Ling plant farmer. Zhuo Mo saw enormous profit in the ever-increasing prices of all materials in the market. It was all Jingshi. But a clever wife would be tripped by no rice. Without Ling fields, he didn't have anything. His skills could not be used. He needed to find some Ling fields, Zhuo Mo decided. For some unknown reason, he kept on having a feeling of doom. It might have been that Pu Yao had once said, "A war is starting," or maybe he was thinking too much. Pu Yao, that old antique, it wasn't the first time he had spoken nonsense. Out of caution, he still decided to try to increase his cultivation. Before, due to the existence of the Ling vein in the rock room, Zhuo Mo had never thought of using other methods of increasing his cultivation. He had even sold the Ling grains that the sect gave him each month for Jingshi. He had also never thought of making Lingdan that would be of benefit for his cultivation. He would always choose Lingdan that was the easiest to sell and had the greatest profit margins. Coming back to it, he hadn't learned Dan making long ago. This question was quite difficult for him. When he had the free time, he needed to study it, Zhuo Mo thought. He was struggling with a problem, Jingshi. He desperately needed Jingshi. On one hand, he hoped to help Pu Yao. On the other hand, what was more painful than watching a good business opportunity slip away in front of his eyes? This was like staring at a neatly ordered army of Jingshi boldly march past him. Master's band still rang in his ears. However, Zhuo Mo still bore up against the pressure and went to fragrant ginger yard. He disregarded the astonished gazes of Su Qing and the other female disciples. At least, Zhuo Mo didn't show any timidness on the surface. Right now, he was the first-ranked person in fragrant ginger yard other than Master. Naturally, no one dared to stop him. He would accept being punished. Zhuo Mo's eyes were teary as he started to make golden crow pills. Right now, his cultivation had increased, and adding on the streaming fire core manipulation formation, his efficiency at making golden crow pill was astonishing. When Zhuo Mo, eyes full of enlarged blood vessels, took a large batch of golden crow pills and found Li Yingfeng was dumbstruck. She hesitated for a beat and asked, "Shitty, weren't you banned from dan making by Shigu?" Zhuo Mo had a grimace as he said, "I lack Jingshi." Realization appeared on Li Yingfeng's face. She didn't ask any further, nodding her head and said, "This batch of golden crow pills will sell easily. I can give you a down payment of Jingshi to you first." "Many thanks, Shiji." Zhuo Mo was very grateful. Li Yingfeng smiled, "But when Shigu comes back, you won't be able to escape being punished." Zhuo Mo spread his hands helplessly, "There's no way around it." After thinking for a second, he decided to remind Shiji could try to buy some raw materials about now. Li Yingfeng looked in shock at Zhuo Mo and then suddenly smiled, "Didn't think that Shidi is also concerned about business." Shidi, don't worry too much. The sect has already hoarded enough materials. Especially dan-making materials. Master had started hoarding a long time ago. Zhuo Mo was relieved. That seemed correct. A problem that even he could see, someone as clever as Yan Leshibua, how could he not see it? Zhuo Mo's heart was steadied by the sect's proactive approach. He was paid 20 pieces of third-grade Jingshi from Li Yingfeng. Taking this enormous sum of wealth, Zhuo Mo didn't feel very happy. He only felt that time was even tighter. The market prices had risen again. This was undoubtedly a strong signal. Give it to Puyao. Suemo gritted his teeth. Okay. But then, he paused. How would he give it to Puyao? Usually, Puyao would do it himself, and rob him of Jingshi. Suemo didn't have any way to take Jingshi into his consciousness. Puyao, it's not that Ji doesn't want you to use it. Suemo, mind at peace, put away the Jingshi. After some thought, he decided to rent a Ling garden. Due to the climate of Sky Moon Jia, it was very suited for farming, so there were many Ling gardens. But many of the Ling gardens, especially those with Ling fields above 3rd grade, they always lacked people to farm them. For Ling fields of 3rd grade and above, it needed somewhat professional shouja to farm them. Otherwise, it was too much of a waste of resources. Normal shouja were not able to pay the huge rent. Sky Moon Jia was primarily sword shio, and the number of Ling plant farmers were pitiful, so there were many empty Ling gardens. The owner of the Ling garden in front of him was chattering on, "Don't worry, I won't cheat you. This Ling garden isn't big, but the Ling energy is dense and it is all 3rd grade Ling fields. The air is very humid and sun exposure is appropriate. It is suited to farming all kinds of Ling grasses and herbs. It would be a pity to just farm Ling grains." "How much for a year?" Suemo asked straightforwardly. 15 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. The other answered resolutely. Accepted. Suemo, whose wallet had just bulged, responded briskly. He was trying to steal time right now. 200 mu of 3rd grade Ling fields, it was enough for him to work with. Now that the Ling fields had been rented, it was a question of what to plant. Since it was 200 mu of Ling fields, he couldn't pay as much attention and care as he did for the Ling fields of West Wind Valley. Luckily, this Ling garden was not far from Wukong's sword sect. He needed time. Suemo's eyes were entirely red and extremely motivated. In the end, Suemo picked a Ling grass called fiery red flower that was used very commonly in many healing Ling Dan. It also grew extremely quickly. The turnover was very quick and easy to sell, it was just perfect. Suemo planted a whole 180 mu of fiery red flowers. The remaining 20 mu, he planted 3 kinds of slightly rare Ling herbs. This 20 mu was to increase his cultivation speed. Speaking of how to speed up increasing cultivation, there were many methods, but the majority was related to Jingshi. Of the ways, the best was to just take in the Ling energy inside Jingshi. This could dramatically increase the speed of cultivation. However, it requires special methods to resolve the domineering nature of the Ling energy of the Jingshi. In comparison, Suemo felt that it was more practical to find a way in Dan making. Most of what he could make presently were 1st and 2nd grade Ling Dan. His success rate with 1st grade Ling Dan was relatively high. It was hard to say about the success rate of 2nd grade Ling Dan. There were very little low-level Ling Dan that could directly increase cultivation. As the Ling grasses and herbs in low-level Ling Dan were also low-grade, their effects were very limited. Suemo had been able to find a few that he needed in the records room of Fragrant Ginger Yard, like the bone-tempering Dan, to change the flesh, the evil-removing Dan, for removing impurities of the body. The effects of these obscure Ling Dan were not major, and the effects were all those that were not prioritized by Sword Shio. Suemo didn't have any room to choose. Bone-tempering Dan, and evil-removing Dan, didn't have great effects, but he thought that if it was used together with Vajra Profound Sutra, it would have some effect. The other than that, what he placed importance on was Spirit Increasing Dan. Its effect was also obscure. It could increase the consciousness of Shouja. Suemo decided to use it in combination with embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. He didn't know if it would help. These obscure Ling Dan, there wasn't any place that sold it in Dongfu. It was a pity that couldn't find Lingdan that could directly increase the speed of cultivation. Upon further thought, he found it normal. If those Lingdan were easily made, one could just eat Dan all day. However, Zhua Mo depressedly found that the 3 Lingdan he had put so much effort into picking, had 3 kinds of rare ingredients that he couldn't buy. Luckily, he managed to buy the seeds and had planted down 20 mu. Chapter 85. Coming up to the doors, Mo had just finished sorting out his just-rented Ling garden and dragged his exhausted body back to the little west wind yard. But when he saw the pink little thousand crane, he wanted to faint. Could she not torment him? Mo wanted to cry. But this situation wouldn't change based on his wishes, he could only adjust to it. Yi, it's so boring, let's play a game. Mo wanted to reply with, Go really isn't bored. But taking into account the other's strange fondness for fireworks, Mo was extremely calm and intelligent in returning, I don't know how to play games. He felt he wasn't lying to the other. He really didn't know how to play games. Games, to him, it was so strange that it was like he didn't even know the word. His life, from the moment he opened his eyes, it was determined that he couldn't leisurely play games and live a life. But the other was very kind in not looking down at him and said, That's all right, I'll teach ye. Mo gave his last struggles, I'm dumb and can't be taught. But, just like previous times, the other didn't give him any room to rebel. Consequently, Mo saw a string of about 8,000 characters of game rules. This time, Mo really fainted. Such difficulty, for someone like him who didn't like games, it really wasn't something he could complete. He only read a few words before deciding to give up. He persisted, I'm really stupid. But considering that the probability of enraging the other was too high, he weakly added another sentence, How about you find the simplest game? This time, what reached his hand was a set of game instructions about 200 characters. Mo's mind couldn't help but jump. Wasn't this a formation problem? He read it thoroughly again and finally was certain that this was really a formation problem. Formations was an area of systematic study. Mo, located in a small sect, naturally didn't have any experience. However, in some large sects, the disciples would learn formations. From the simplest simple Ling formation, to yin-yang formation, compound formations and gradually increasing the difficulty. This was an extremely long process of study. To help disciples with learning, some shoja skilled in formations had created a set of methods to learn formations. Included in the methods were all kinds of formation problems. Like corrections, fill in the blanks, optimization etc. There were many kinds. Over time, some shoja enjoyed the process and were infatuated, creating even harder formation problems. Between many disciples, they used them as games. Mo had never played this before and felt it was very interesting. The formations that were used were not complicated. Mo had learned them before. However, the problem was extremely tricky. He couldn't help but fall into thinking. The other seemed to know that he was thinking and didn't hurry him. Thinking for a long time, he didn't figure out anything. Mo shook his head hard and recovered some clarity. He couldn't help but gape inside. Did those large sect disciples play like this? He couldn't help but admire them. No wonder they were so strong. Even the things they played with were this powerful. However, he decided to put this game down first. There were many things he still had to do. Games, it was fine to play when he had free time. In any case, that damned woman hadn't hurried him. Mo went into the stone room to practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra. After cultivation, he took out the water drop sword from the Ling spring. With the nourishment from the Ling spring, its sheen was clearer than before. Xuemo caressed the water-drop sword and then started to imprint it. One flying sword, it needed a long time to imprint it before it could move like a part of the body. And to have it move according to one's thoughts, the time needed was even longer. The flying sword was like a sword shio's partner. The longer they were together, the more chemistry they had. Sword shio wouldn't easily change a flying sword. This point, especially after reaching Jindan, it was even more evident. These days that were spent imprinting it, he didn't waste his efforts. Right now, Xuemo could move the sword like it was a part of his body. It was of a higher grade than ice crystal sword and was even more nimble. Xuemo's mind moved and the water-drop sword in his hand jumped into midair. At the same time, he gave a shout and jumped up from the ground. The sword flashed and moved easily. In mid-air, a flame that seemed to be made out of water gave off a faint light. The places the sword passed, a stream of water flames burned silently. Xuemo seemed to be drunk. Using the water-drop sword to practice Li water sword scripture, it was truly an experience. When he reached the peak of his enjoyment, Xuemo didn't follow the sword scripture anymore. The sword couldn't be detected as he moved, and the sword seemed to carry a few hints of the explosive Li water sword essence in the calm, and it still spread like waves. The sword essence, which had been light and wave-like, gradually turned heavier and pressuring. When it moved with great force. The explosiveness which had been barely perceivable started to burn like fire in the wind. Still as cool as before but containing a strong explosiveness. Those two conflicting feelings gathered together but Xuemo didn't seem to feel it and wasn't uncomfortable at all. On the water-drop sword, the light fire-like sword energy gradually started to retreat inside. When Xuemo woke up from his epiphany, he finally realized, without him noticing, his Li water sword scripture had went up a level. There wasn't much joy. He stood there silently, finally savoring it. He wasn't clear himself what level his Li water sword scripture was at now. Li water sword scripture wasn't some high-level and profound scripture. Even its creator wasn't some powerful sword shio. It was quite unusual that Xuemo could master a sword scripture like this to this level. However, Xuemo needed to explore the road ahead by himself, because the Li water sword scripture that he had practiced ended here. Even though the creator had written some of his speculations and frameworks for the future, many of those had been rejected by Puyao. Based on profoundness, Li water sword essence was far from the tidal sword essence Xuemo had secretly learned. However, this was Xuemo's own comprehension and the sword essence he had the greatest grasp on. His understanding of Li water sword essence far surpassed tidal sword essence. Maybe, he could look and study tidal sword essence and change Li water sword scripture. Xuemo's heart moved. But he only thought about it. He wasn't so proud to the point of changing a sword scripture. Also, his understanding of tidal sword essence was just a hair. At this time, he suddenly detected that someone was outside the valley. The person who was there was very docile and hadn't set off the Jinji. Mouth of West Wind Valley. Xixiang, Lingying sect's people came again. The messenger was still the outer sect disciple that had come last time. However, there wasn't any of the fear that had been on his face last time, but excitement. They came again. Xuemo was dazed. Yes. The disciple said respectfully. He couldn't disguise his excitement. This time, 5 people came. Xuemo instantly felt his scalp prickle. 5 people. Last time, 3 had come. Now this time, 5 people. Xuemo wanted to turn and run. They hadn't given up, and called to spar with Xixiang. This outer sect disciple completely didn't notice Xuemo's shift and said excitedly, "This group really doesn't know their own weight." Cough. Xuemo forced himself to come and swallowed. He asked, "Who came this time?" The 3 from last time are all here, and 2 that I don't recognize. Suomo's heart calmed down lightly. Good, good, at least, it wasn't that all 5 were people he didn't know. 2 people who had lost to him. He had completely reason to disregard them. The woman, she hadn't dared to fight that day, so this time, she definitely wouldn't act rashly. The headache was those 2 that he didn't know. Since the others had come to settle the score, they certainly would be stronger than the last 2. His mind turned quickly. Inside, he was very hesitant. Should he go or not? He was slightly regretful that he had said too much previously. He asked, "Where's the other Xixiang? You can't bother just me every time with this kind of matter. Eldest Xixiang and Shiji are all outside. Luo Li Xixiang is in seclusion. Su Yi Xixiang is forging and has ordered not to bother him. Hao Min Shiji is being punished. Only Su Yi Xia Shiji is free. Should I notify her? That woman." Dislike instantly rose in his heart. Never mind. If she was notified, the probability that this woman would do something behind his back was very high. Fine. Thinking about the new comprehension he just got from Li Water Sword Scripture, Mo was instantly full of confidence. He had just learned something, and some people just came over for him to test it on. This Lingying sect really was full of good people. After thinking it through, Mo didn't retreat anymore. He nodded and said with great composure, "Go." This outer sect disciple was instantly excited and hurried forward to lead the way. When they reached the mountain gate, Mo instantly staggered when he saw the dense crowd. Why are there so many people? This outer sect disciple was extremely excited. Everyone heard that Lingying's sect had come and all ran over to personally see Xixiang win and teach a lesson to Lingying's sect's new money. But why are there female disciples as well? Mo asked speechlessly. Must be coming to admire Xixiang's elegant demeanor. Goosebumps instantly rose over Mo's entire body. Seeing Mo come out, the crowd of female disciples shrieked. Mo almost tripped. Wow! Xixiang is so handsome. Please. It's called cool. When Xixiang was in the outer sect, I knew then that Xixiang wasn't an average person. Really want to seduce him, I will kill you. Large black lines fell over Mo's expressionless face. He decided to stay a bit further away from this crowd of crazy women. When Mo started walking towards the side with male disciples, the male disciples also expressed their emotions. Xixiang, kill them. Chop them. Chop into 8 pieces, cut of their hands and feet, pluck their tendons, break their channels, cut them up, so uncreative. Have to sunflower, Mo rapidly distanced himself from these people that were completely sunk in fighting spirit. In the short journey of traveling through the female and male disciples, Mo, who had been full of fighting spirit, almost became completely lacking in the desire to fight. Of course, in the eyes of everyone else, Mo Xixiang was stepping resolutely, with a cool expression, and extremely elegantly passing from their side. But when Mo saw the even worse expressions on the faces of the 5 people from Lingying's sect, his mood instantly became better. Chapter 86, Wen Fei. Good day everyone. Mo raised his hands in a greeting. Yan Mingzi and Hu Shan's expressions instantly became slightly uglier. Good. Good. After they returned to the sect, they had been greeted with scorn and mockery. Tao Zhuer covered her mouth and giggled. Mirth appeared on the faces of the 2 Lingying sect disciples, but the 2 managed to restrain themselves. Lingying's sect had the largest number of inner sect disciples in Dongfu. At the same time, because they lacked a strong leader, the disciples fell into factions and the complexity of the inner sect was also the first in Dongfu. Tao Zhu moved gracefully, her beautiful features instantly attracting everyone's eyes. Wukong sword sect's outer sect disciples quickly divided into two camps. The male disciples stared, some of them dazed, as they drooled. Jealousy rose up in the female disciple camp, shouts of "whores" and "fox demon" came out. Tao Zhu gave a beautiful smile. This little sister admires Wuxia Xianxia's demeanor last time. However, as a disciple of Lingying's sect, I cannot watch as our sect's reputation is injured and have come today to specially visit Wuxia Xianxia. The other said it so nobly, but Sua Mo sneered inside. This female might have a good appearance, but she was as poisonous as a scorpion. If one wasn't careful, they would fall into her hands. Sua Mo, having seen her laugh so heartlessly when her fellow disciples were defeated, didn't have a good impression of her. Oh, nothing changed on Sua Mo's face. Adding on that his face was tilted down, it was even harder for others to guess his thoughts. Tao Zhu instantly felt that her fist had hit cotton. Such an indifferent response, she didn't know what to say. But she wasn't a simple person. She took a step back and revealed the two other Xixiang, stating, "Wen Fei Xixiang and Mingdao Xixiang are truly skilled disciples of our Lingying sect, and are people this little sister admire very much." Coming this time, hearing this, Wen Shan and Mingdao instantly couldn't help themselves from raising their head proudly and pushing out their chests. Evidently they were very smug. "If you want to fight, then let's fight." Sua Mo suddenly opened, interrupting her. "However, our Wukong mountain isn't a place you can come and go whenever you want. Let's say the ugly matters first. Whoever loses to me, I will take a talisman from them to prove our sect's reputation." The words were said righteously. The Wukong sword sect outer sect disciples all cheered. Hearing this, the two people's expressions became discontent. Wen Fei was clothed in green and white. A green soft cloth tied on his head. This made him look extremely elegant, as though he would leave with the wind at any time, almost like an immortal. He wasn't satisfied to be on the weak side and smirked, "Fine, fine. If you have the ability, this one naturally will recognize the loss." Wearing blue Ling armor, and hair tied with a gold coronet, Mingdao also spoke, "If you lose, I will also take a talisman from you." Tao Zhu stood in the back. Seeing the two sides about to fight, a smug smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Yan Mingzi and Hu Shan's eyes were blood red as they stared at Sua Mo. They looked as though they wanted to eat him alive. "Who is first?" Sua Mo asked as he stepped out a step, his presence soaring. It might have been that he had just practiced the sword. He felt his entire body was hot, his blood on fire, as though he was being roasted. The desire for battle suddenly erupted, moving restlessly as though it wanted to burst out of his body. Like a keen sword unsheathed, the sharp edge flashed into view. One step, and it was as though Sua Mo had changed into a whole other person. The dullness that was on the surface and the slyness inside his bones seemed to have completely flown away. Desire for battle flowed on his body. It was tangible, so pure that others could not disregard it. Tao Zhu looked dazedly at Sua Mo. The expression on her beautiful face was like she had seen a ghost. How was this possible? Was this still that vulgar and greedy zombie? In her mind, Sua Mo had a greedy and cheap character. Otherwise, who else would target someone else's flying sword in the middle of battle? Being defeated last time, especially by a little person like him, this was why Tao Zhu was so persistent. Getting tripped up by an opponent that she looked down on, how could she accept it? But, the Sua Mo in front of her. Seriousness made its way into Wen Shan's eyes. The presence that the other exuded surprised him. However, he wasn't the kind of wastrel that Hu Shan and Yan Mingzi were. His family might be rich, but he was very hardworking and did have some true abilities. He was shocked but not afraid. Taking a step forward, he declared, "I'll fight." Wen Fei revealed his talisman. A light green jade fan. The skeleton was made out of jade, the cloth of the fan clearly wasn't some common material. Green light could be seen moving on the surface. A painting of mountains and water was depicted on the surface of the fan. If someone looked closely, they would discover that the river stream between the mountains was actually slowly flowing. Sky River Fan, 3rd grade. Water Drop Sword, 3rd grade. Xuemo couldn't help but sigh again at the variety of scriptures that Lingying's sect had. They even used fans. When Yan Mingzi saw his water drop sword, his expression became ugly. However, he liked to collect all kinds of talismans and his eyes were very experienced. He instantly noticed that the quality of the water drop sword was slightly better than when he had been in possession of it. He became slightly depressed. Did flying swords selectively pick people as well? Please. Wen Fei shouted elegantly. The water drop sword moved before the word ended. Flowing water. Xuemo's favorite starting move. This move was like a sheep climbing a cliff, traceless. The move he released right now was very different from before. Before, it had been light and faint. Right now, it was still quiet, but there was a hint of fire. It was like a white flame, burning without a sound. Wen Fei smirked and gently waved Sky River Fan. Xuemo felt his eyes blur and an incredibly thick pillar of water came from the sky like a water dragon, heading towards him. Water Dragon Roar. Attack against attack. No one would have thought that Wen Fei, such a warm and elegant person, would fight so brutally. The two were competing to see whose attack would reach the other first. Xuemo snorted. His sword presence didn't change. The Ling energy in his legs moving, he suddenly flashed towards the left. It was as though there were springs under his feet. His speed was extremely fast and dodged the water dragon. Competing in attacks. Xuemo wasn't afraid. Based on speed, nothing could compare to flying swords. He gathered his Ling energy and the water drop sword gave a slight hum. The sword turned into a stream of light, it was as fast as lightning. A thin water curtain suddenly appeared in front of Wen Fei. The water drop sword crashed heavily against the water curtain. The water curtain shook fiercely. Wen Fei's expression behind the water curtain changed slightly. However, the curtain shook, but still managed to stop the water drop sword. Xuemo was also surprised. This water curtain seemed to be a thin layer and he hadn't thought it could stop the water drop sword. It was much stronger than he had predicted. However, he could also see this water curtain had just managed to stop it. If he put in a bit more effort, it would certainly break. He was going to channel his Ling energy and hadn't thought the thick water dragon would act as if it was alive, turning nimbly and reversing back in his direction. In the blink of an eye, the water dragon rushed in front of him. When this water dragon appeared in front of him, he finally realized just how enormous it was. It was like a large river, roaring as it headed for his head, the presence extremely shocking. Xuemo didn't even think as the water drop sword turned into a dash of light and appeared between him and the water dragon. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and the water drop sword rose. Waterfall. Everyone felt the landscape suddenly flash and a waterfall seemed to have appeared in front of Xuemo. It was a waterfall composed of countless sword energies. As they flowed, they accurately hit the head of the water dragon. Boom! The head of the water dragon suddenly exploded, water splashing everywhere. The disciples that had been watching were instantly soaked but no one moved their eyes away. Such a spectacular fight, if they missed something, it would be such a pity. The water dragon continued to flow, as though it didn't have an end. The waterfall that was floating in the sky also seemed endless. Amazing! Yan Mingzi said, his mouth gaping. He was completely convinced now. The other was so powerful, winning last time, it wasn't due to trickery. Hu Shan didn't dare to blink and nodded in empathy. I had heard before that Wen Fei Xixiang Sky River Fan can enter the top 3 of our generation of disciples. It really lives up to the rumors. Yan Mingzi said, sharing in the pride, right. But my water drop sword isn't mediocre. To be able to keep up with Sky River Fan, it isn't of average quality. I have really good eyes. That's because Zhuomo's strong. Hu Shan wasn't polite. In your hands, it would be great if you could even block 5 of Wen Xixiang's moves. Yan Mingzi wasn't angry. I'm not good as others in fighting. However, in buying talismans, which one of you is my match? Hu Shan choked, not knowing what to say. Waves also spread in Tao Zhuer's heart. She would have never thought that Zhua Mo could keep up with Wen Fei Xixiang because she knew just how strong Wen Fei Xixiang was. Wen Fei Xixiang wasn't famous outside the sect, but in this generation of Lingying sect disciples, he was a truly strong person. He was deeply loved by the elders. That Sky River Fan had been made specially for him by the sect elders and was the envy of countless people. Wen Fei Xixiang didn't fail to live up to expectations. His talent was exceptional and he was hardworking. Adding on the nourishment from countless Lingdan, his power was extremely deep. However, he rarely fought. Even the other disciples in the sect didn't know just how strong he was. Tao Zhuer had accidentally saw Wen Fei Xixiang cultivating and had been shocked. It had left a deep impression. That was why she had requested Wen Fei Xixiang. She wanted to beat down Zhuo Mo's bravado. Also, Tao Zhuer knew that the elders were planning for Wen Fei Xixiang to make a display in the upcoming Dong Fu Sword Test Conference. This horrid zombie was actually able to fight to a standstill with Wen Fei Xixiang. How was this possible? Tao Zhuer felt that her brains couldn't process it. The outer sect disciples stared with wide eyes, completely silent. Zhua Mo didn't notice. In the female disciples, an adorable and pink apple face was extremely nervous. Even her little fists couldn't help but tighten. The two exchanged blows like lightning. The 2 moves passed in the blink of an eye. Right now, it had moved into a standstill period. Everyone was able to release a breath. Recalling what happened, they cheered. But the 2 that were facing off were not so relaxed. The disdain that Wen Fei had initially had disappeared completely. What took over was seriousness. He, who had been desiring to show himself at the Sword Sect Conference, hadn't thought that he would meet such a strong opponent here. And Zhua Mo, 2 balls of fire furiously jumped in his eyes, his desire for battle in full swing. A standstill was disadvantageous for him. There was still another person. If he didn't quickly end the fight, then he basically had no hope of victory for the next battle. His thoughts swirling, he gave a long howl and decided to attack with all his power. You're tuning into the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.